In the smoky haze of a London mansion, Hercule Poirot faces a deadly game, a poker night hosted by the sinister Mr. Shaitana. Who's invited for undetected murderers to play? When Shaitana is stabbed mid-game, Poirot, alongside 3 sharp detectives, must unravel the killer's bluff through cunning bets, hidden pasts, and a trail of clues in the poker scores. Poirot's little grey cells race to catch a murderer before they strike again in this gripping tale of deception and death. Chapter 1. The invitation to Peril autumn evening in London carried a chill that seemed to seep through the very walls of the city's grandest establishments, as if the fog itself whispered secrets of the night. Hercule Poirot, the diminutive Belgian detective with his meticulously waxed moustache and polished patent leather shoes, stood in the dimly lit gallery of the Wessex House, his sharp green eyes scanning the eclectic crowd. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes and the low hum of cultured voices, discussing the latest exhibition of avant-garde art. Poirot, however, was not here for the paintings. He had come at the behest of a peculiar invitation, one that promised intrigue far more captivating than the abstract canvases surrounding him. He adjusted his perfectly knotted tie, a subtle gesture that betrayed his fastidious nature, and cast his gaze toward a figure approaching through the throng. Mr. Shaitana, the host of this soiree, glided toward him with the grace of a panther, his dark eyes gleaming with a mischievous delight. Shaitana was a man of indeterminate origin, his olive skin and exotic features suggesting a heritage as enigmatic as his reputation. Dressed in a tailored suit of deep burgundy, he seemed to embody both elegance and danger, a combination that set Poirot's instincts on edge. "Monsieur Poirot," Shaitana said, his voice smooth as velvet, with a faint accent that defied precise placement. "How delightful that you could join us. I trust the evening finds you in good spirits." Poirot inclined his head, his expression one of polite curiosity. "The evening is most agreeable, Monsieur Shaitana, but I confess I am intrigued by your invitation. You spoke of a unique entertainment." Shaitana's smile widened, revealing teeth that gleamed unnaturally white. "Oh, indeed, my dear Poirot. I am a collector, you see, not of art, nor of antiquities, but of something far more fascinating." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I collect murderers." Poirot's eyebrows rose ever so slightly, a rare sign of surprise from the man who prided himself on his composure. "Murderers, monsieur? That is a most unusual collection." "Not just any murderers," Shaitana continued, his eyes alight with glee. "Those who have escaped justice, the ones who walk among us undetected, their crimes buried in the shadows of the past. I have invited for such individuals to my home tomorrow evening for a little game, and, of course, I could not resist inviting you, the great Hercule Poirot, to witness the spectacle." Poirot's mind raced, though his face remained impassive. The audacity of Shaitana's claim was staggering, yet there was something in the man's demeanor that suggested he was not merely boasting. "And what is this game you propose?" Poirot asked. His tone measured. "A poker game," Shaitana replied, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "For of my exhibits, shall we say, will play against one another, while for detectives you, Superintendent Battle, Colonel Race, and the charming Mrs. Oliver will observe from another room. A test of wits, of nerve, of character. Do you not find it deliciously intriguing?" Poirot's lips twitched, though whether in amusement or disapproval, even he could not say. "It is a dangerous game, Monsieur Shaitana. To bring such individuals together under the guise of amusement, it invites chaos. Chaos is the spice of life, is it not?" Shaitana said, laughing softly. "Come, Poirot, indulge me. Tomorrow evening, at my home in Chelsea, 8 o'clock sharp. Bring your little grey cells, they will have much to occupy them." With that, Shaitana turned and melted back into the crowd, leaving Poirot standing alone, his mind already turning over the implications of the invitation. A poker game with the suspected murderers. It was madness, yet it was precisely the kind of puzzle that appealed to Poirot's insatiable curiosity. He resolved to attend. if only to ensure that Shaitana's reckless gain did not spiral into something far darker. The following evening, Poirot's sleek black taxi wound its way through the fog-draped streets of Chelsea. The city's lights, blurred into soft halos by the mist, he sat in the back, his gloved hands resting lightly on his cane, his thoughts as precise as the ticking of a Swiss watch. Shaitana's invitation had lingered in his mind all day, a puzzle wrapped in an enigma. Who were these for individuals Shaitana claimed as murderers, and why poker? The game, with its blend of strategy, deception, and psychology, was an apt metaphor for the human soul. Poirot mused. Perhaps Shaitana intended to reveal more than he let on. The taxi pulled up before a grand Georgian mansion, its windows glowing with warm light that seemed to defy the chill outside. Poirot stepped out, his polished shoes clicking on the cobblestones, and ascended the steps to the heavy oak door. A butler, impeccably dressed and silent as a shadow, ushered him inside, taking his coat and hat with practiced efficiency. The interior of Shaitana's home was a study in opulence, with Persian rugs, crystal chandeliers, and walls adorned with artworks that ranged from Renaissance portraits to modernist abstractions. The air carried the faint scent of sandalwood, and a low hum of conversation greeted Poirot as he was led to the drawing-room. There, he found 3 familiar faces awaiting him. Superintendent Battle, a sturdy, unassuming man with a deceptively bland demeanor, stood near the fireplace, his keen eyes scanning the room. Colonel Race, tall and bronzed from years abroad, exuded the quiet authority of a man accustomed to danger. And Mrs. Ariadne Oliver, the celebrated mystery novelist, was perched on a velvet sofa, her apple-green shawl clashing delightfully with her exuberant personality. "Poirot, you old rogue," Mrs. Oliver called out, waving a glass of sherry. "What's this nonsense Shaitana's cooked up? Murderers at a poker game. Sounds like something I'd write, only less sensible." Poirot smiled, bowing slightly. "Madame Oliver, your imagination is, as always, a force of nature. But I suspect Monsieur Shaitana's game is no mere fiction." Battle nodded, his expression serious. "He's playing with fire, if you ask me, taunting people who've killed before it's asking for trouble. Trouble is Shaitana's currency," Colonel Race remarked, his voice low and measured. "I've heard rumors about him in Cairo and Istanbul. The man collects secrets like others collect stamps." Before Poirot could respond, the door opened, and Shaitana entered, followed by his 4 other guests. The atmosphere in the room shifted subtly, as if a cold draught had slipped through an unseen crack. Shaitana's smile was as enigmatic as ever, but his eyes glittered with a dangerous excitement. "My dear friends," he said, spreading his arms as if to embrace the room, "allow me to introduce my special guests, Dr. Geoffrey Roberts, a most esteemed physician, Mrs. Lorimer, a lady of impeccable grace, Major John Despard, an adventurer of some renown, and Miss Meredith, a vision of youth and charm." Poirot's gaze moved from one to the other, his mind cataloguing every detail. Dr. Roberts was a robust man in his 50s with a hearty laugh and a too-easy smile that did not quite reach his eyes. Mrs. Lorimer, an elegant woman of advanced years, carried herself with the poise of a dowager, her sharp gaze missing nothing. Major Despard, lean and weathered, had the restless energy of a man more at home in the jungle than a drawing-room, and Meredith, barely 25, was a delicate beauty with wide, nervous eyes that darted about like a startled deer. "Dinner is served," Shaitana announced, gesturing toward the dining room, "and afterward we shall play our little game." The dining room was a masterpiece of decadence, its long mahogany table set with crystal and silver that gleamed under the chandelier's light. The meal was exquisite consomme, roasted pheasant, and a delicate mousseau chocolate, but Poirot paid little attention to the food. His focus was on the guests, their interactions, their subtle tells. Shaitana, seated at the head of the table, was in his element, steering the conversation with the skill of a conductor. "Tell me, Major Despard," Shaitana said, his tone teasing, "is it true you once faced a jaguar in the Amazon with nothing but a knife?" Despard's jaw tightened, but he forced a smile. "Exaggerations, I'm afraid. The jungle is dangerous enough without embellishing the tales." And you, Dr. Roberts. Shaitana continued, undeterred. Your skill with a scalpel must be legendary. Have you ever slipped, perhaps in a moment of distraction? Roberts laughed, a booming sound that seemed to fill the room. My hands are steady, Shaitana. My patients have no complaints. Well, the living ones, at any rate. The table chuckled, but Poirot noted the flicker of unease in Meredith's eyes. Mrs. Lorimer, meanwhile, remained serene, sipping her wine with an air of detachment. Shaitana's barbs were deliberate, Poirot realized, designed to unsettle his collection. But to what end? As the meal drew to a close, Shaitana rose, clapping his hands. Now, to the main event. We shall adjourn to the card room. The detectives Poirot, Battle, Race, and the delightful Mrs. Oliver will play in one room, while my four guests will play in another. Poker, of course, a game of skill, nerve, and deception. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Shaitana's emphasis on deception was no accident. The man was orchestrating a performance, but for whom? The detectives, the suspects, or himself? The card room was divided into two sections by a heavy velvet curtain, allowing the groups to play separately yet remain within earshot. The detectives' table was set with a green baize cloth, a deck of cards, and a stack of chips. But Poirot's attention was on the other side of the curtain. Shaitana had chosen to sit by the fire in the suspects' room, ostensibly to watch, but not play. His presence there was a statement. Poirot thought a reminder to the players that he held their secrets. As the detectives settled at their table, Mrs. Oliver shuffled the cards with exaggerated flair. I say, Poirot, do you think Shaitana's serious about these people being murderers, or is he just pulling our legs? Shaitana does not strike me as a man who jests without purpose, Poirot replied, his voice low. We must watch, listen, and observe. The game of poker will reveal much, I think. Battle dealt the first hand, his movements precise. I'll keep an eye on their table through the curtain's gap. If Shaitana's right, one of them's dangerous or not, Colonel Race said, picking up his cards. This game's going to be one to remember. On the other side of the curtain, the suspects began their game. Poirot's ears strained to catch their voices, their laughter, their silences. Dr. Roberts was jovial, betting boldly. Mrs. Lorimer played with quiet precision, her bids calculated. Despard was cautious, folding often, and Meredith's voice trembled slightly, her bets erratic. Poirot made a mental note of each, knowing that the game was more than a pastime. It was a window into their souls. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere grew heavier. Shaitana's laughter rang out occasionally, sharp and mocking, as if he were goading his players. Poirot's fingers tapped lightly on the table, his mind racing. The poker game was a microcosm of life. He thought bluffing, risk, reward, and the ever-present possibility of betrayal. Hours passed, the clock striking 11 as the games continued. Poirot, though engaged in the detective's game, kept his focus on the sounds from the other room. A sudden silence caught his attention, followed by a soft thud. Barely audible over the clink of chips and shuffle of cards, he exchanged a glance. With Battle, who nodded almost imperceptibly, "Excuse me," Poirot said, rising smoothly. "A moment, if you please." He slipped through the curtain, his heart quickening. The suspect's table was still, the players frozen in their seats, their cards forgotten. Shaitana sat by the fire, his head slumped forward, a jeweled dagger protruding from his chest. Blood stained his burgundy suit, pooling on the Persian rug beneath him. Poirot's eyes swept the room. Dr. Roberts was half standing, his face flushed. Mrs. Lorimer's hands were folded calmly, though her knuckles were white. Despard's jaw was set, his eyes darting to the dagger, and Meredith's breath came in shallow gasps, her hands trembling. "Monsieur Shaitana is dead," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "And one of you has played your final hand." The suspects stared at him, their faces a tableau of shock, fear, and Poirot noted with interest calculation. The game had changed, and Hercule Poirot was now the dealer. The next hour was a flurry of activity. Superintendent Battle took charge, securing the room and sending for the police. Colonel Race examined the body, confirming the dagger was the cause of death, a single. Precise thrust to the heart. Mrs. Oliver, ever the dramatist, paced the room, muttering about plot twists and red herrings. Poirot, however, remained still, his eyes moving from one suspect to another. The poker table was untouched, the cards and chips exactly as they had been when the murder occurred. He noted the scores, scribbled on a notepad by Shaitana himself, who had taken a perverse interest in recording the game's progress. Those scores, Poirot thought, might hold the key to the killer's identity. "Everyone stay where you are," Battle ordered, his voice calm but firm. "No one leaves until we've sorted this out." Dr. Roberts cleared his throat, his jovial demeanor strained. "This is monstrous. Surely you don't think one of us—" "I think nothing yet," Poirot interrupted, his tone sharp. "But I observe, and I listen. The truth, it will reveal itself." Mrs. Lorimer's eyes met his, steady and unyielding. "You're a clever man, Monsieur Poirot, but even you cannot see into the hearts of men and women." Poirot smiled faintly. "Perhaps not, madam, but I can see into their actions, and in poker, as in life, actions betray the soul." As the police arrived, Poirot stepped back, his mind already constructing the puzzle. For suspects, each with a past Shaitana claimed to know, a murder committed in plain sight, yet unseen, and a poker game. It scores a cipher for the killer's mind. The little grey cells, as always, were ready for the challenge. The remainder of the chapter unfolds with Poirot beginning his investigation, questioning each suspect briefly to establish their movements during the game. Dr. Roberts claims he was focused on a particularly intense hand, betting heavily on a flush. Mrs. Lorimer says she stepped away to adjust the fire, noticing nothing unusual. Despard admits to leaving the table to fetch a drink, passing close to Shaitana. And Meredith, tearful, insists she was too nervous to notice anything, her cards a blur. Poirot notes their stories, aware that one or more is lying. He examines the poker scores in detail, observing patterns, Robert's aggressive bets, Lorimer's consistent wins, Despard's cautious folds, and Meredith's erratic play. Each move, he believes, reflects their character, and one character hides a murderer. The chapter closes with Poirot retiring to his study, the suspects under police watch, as he begins to piece together the psychological puzzle, determined to unmask the killer before they strike again. Chapter 2. The players assemble for autumn evening, draped London in a fine mist, its damp fingers curling around the gaslights that flickered along Park Lane. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit with a crisp white shirt and a discreet silver teapin, stepped from his hired car onto the polished steps of Mr. Shaitana's mansion. The building loomed before him, an opulent Georgian structure with tall windows glowing warmly against the twilight. Its grandeur was understated yet undeniable, much like the man who owned it. Poirot adjusted his hat, his mustache twitching. As he surveyed the facade, he had accepted Shaitana's invitation with curiosity, tempered by a wariness that had grown over years of encountering men who played games with truth. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of beeswax polish and exotic flowers, their heavy perfume drifting from vases that lined the entrance hall. A liveried servant took Poirot's coat and hat, bowing slightly before leading him through a corridor adorned with paintings bold, modern works that clashed with the mansion's classical architecture. Shaitana's taste, Poirot noted, was as theatrical as his reputation. The man himself appeared moments later, descending a curved staircase with the grace of a panther. His dark eyes gleamed under the chandelier's light, and his smile was both welcoming and faintly predatory. "Monsieur Poirot," Shaitana purred, his voice smooth as velvet, tinged with an accent that defied precise origin. "I am honored. You accepted my little invitation. Come, the others await." Poirot inclined his head, his sharp green eyes studying Shaitana. The man was an enigma, a collector of rare objects and, by his own admission, rarer secrets. At the art exhibition where they'd met, Shaitana had spoken of his collection of uncaught murderers, men and women who, he claimed, had killed and walked free. It was a dangerous boast, one that had piqued Poirot's interest and stirred his unease. Now, as he followed Shaitana into the dining room, he wondered what game his host was playing. The room was a study in extravagance. A long mahogany table gleamed under the light of a crystal chandelier, its surface set with fine china and silver cutlery that sparkled like stars. The walls were hung with tapestries depicting scenes of revelry, their rich colors adding to the room's warmth. 7 guests were already seated or mingling, their voices a low hum against the clink of glasses. Shaitana clapped his hands, drawing their attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his tone carrying a theatrical flourish, "our final player has arrived. Allow me to present Monsieur Hercule Poirot, the renowned detective whose mind is as sharp as his mustache is precise." A ripple of amusement passed through the group, though Poirot noted varying degrees of sincerity in their smiles. He bowed slightly, his gaze sweeping over the assembled company. Shaitana had promised an unusual evening, a poker night for detectives and for individuals he coyly described as persons of interest. Poirot's task, it seemed, was to observe, to deduce, and perhaps to unmask. The first to approach was Ariadne Oliver, the celebrated mystery writer whose novels Poirot had occasionally perused with a mix of admiration and exasperation. Her wild hair, barely contained by a jeweled clip, framed a face alive with curiosity. She wore a flowing green dress that seemed to defy both fashion and gravity. "Monsieur Poirot," she exclaimed, her voice booming with enthusiasm. "I told Shaitana you'd come," I said. "If anyone can spot a murderer over a deck of cards, it's Hercule Poirot. Didn't I, Shaitana?" "You did, Mrs. Oliver," Shaitana replied, his smile indulgent. "And I trust you'll keep us entertained with your theories tonight." Ariadne's eyes sparkled. "Oh, I've got theories aplenty. I've written 42 novels, you know, and I always say the best clues are in the little things, how someone holds their teacup, or whether they fidget with their cuffs." Poirot smiled politely, noting her tendency to dramatize. "The little things, madam, are indeed where the truth often hides." Next came Superintendent Battle of Scotland Yard, a solid, unassuming man whose plain suit and steady gaze belied a mind as tenacious as a bulldog's. His handshake was firm, his expression one of cautious respect. "Poirot," he said simply, "heard of you. Good to have you here, though I'm not sure what Shaitana's up to with this circus." "A circus, oui," Poirot murmured, "but one where the lions may not be tamed." Colonel Race was the third detective, a tall, lean man with the weathered look of someone who had seen too many secrets in distant corners of the empire. His military bearing was softened by a wry smile as he greeted Poirot. "Shaitana's got a flair for the dramatic," Race said, his voice low and dry. "But I suspect you'll see through his smoke and mirrors, Poirot." "I shall endeavor to do so," Poirot replied, his eyes flicking to the remaining guests that for Shaitana had hinted were his collection. Dr. Geoffrey Roberts was a robust man in his 50s, his ruddy complexion and hearty laugh suggesting a jovial nature. His tweed suit was well cut but slightly rumpled. As if he cared more for comfort than appearance, he clapped Poirot on the shoulder with a familiarity that made the detective stiffen. "Poirot, is it?" Roberts boomed. "Heard you're a wizard with clues. Well, I'm just a country doctor, but I fancy a good game of cards. Hope you're ready to lose a few shillings." Poirot's smile was tight. "I play to observe, doctor, not to lose." Mrs. Lorimer, a widow in her 60s, carried herself with the elegance of a bygone era. Her silver hair was swept into a neat chignon, and her black evening gown was adorned with a single pearl brooch. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, met Poirot's with a quiet intensity. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice measured, "Mr. Shaitana speaks highly of your abilities. I trust this evening will prove illuminating." "Madam," Poirot replied, bowing slightly, "I am certain it will." Major John Despard, a rugged man in his late 30s, had the lean build and sun-browned skin of an adventurer. His tweed jacket and open-collared shirt suggested a man more at home in the wilds than a London drawing-room. He nodded to Poirot, his expression guarded but polite. "Pleasure, Poirot," he said. Not much for cards, but Shaitana insisted. Says it's a night for surprises, Major. Poirot said, are often the prelude to truth. The final guest was Meredith, a young woman in her mid-20s whose delicate features and nervous smile suggested fragility. Her simple blue dress was modest, but her hands twisted together as she greeted Poirot, her voice barely above a whisper. Monsieur Poirot, she stammered. I'm not sure why I'm here. I don't know much about poker. Yet you're here, mademoiselle, Poirot said gently, noting the flicker of fear in her eyes. And that, in itself, is significant. Shaitana clapped his hands again, ushering the group to the dining table. Come, my friends, let us dine before we deal the cards. A good meal sharpens the mind, does it not? The dinner was a lavish affair, consomme with delicate herbs, roasted pheasant with truffle sauce, and a dessert of poached pears in spiced wine. The conversation flowed, guided by Shaitana's deft hand. He spoke of art, of travel, of the human heart's capacity for darkness. His words were light, but his eyes lingered on the suspects Roberts, Lorimer, Despard, and Meredith, each of whom reacted differently. Dr. Roberts laughed heartily, deflecting Shaitana's pointed remarks with jokes about his patient's ailments. People think doctors know all about death, he said, spearing a piece of pheasant. But really, we're just trying to keep the living alive. Mrs. Lorimer remained composed, her fork moving with precision as she countered Shaitana's hints with polite deflections. You speak of secrets, Mr. Shaitana, she said at one point, her voice cool. But surely not everyone has something to hide? Shaitana's smile was enigmatic. Oh, my dear Mrs. Lorimer, we all have shadows. Some are merely darker than others. Major Despard ate sparingly, his eyes scanning the table as if assessing a battlefield. When Shaitana mentioned a lost expedition in the Amazon, Despard's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, only sipped his wine. And Meredith was the least at ease, her hands trembling as she pushed food around her plate. When Shaitana spoke of youth and innocence hiding unexpected depths, her fork clattered against her plate, drawing all eyes. She flushed, murmuring an apology. Poirot watched it all, his mind cataloguing every gesture, every inflection. Shaitana's game was clear. He was baiting his guests, testing their nerves. But why? To provoke a confession? To amuse himself? Or to set the stage for something more sinister? Poirot's fingers tapped lightly on the tablecloth, his little grey cells already at work. As the meal ended, Shaitana rose, his glass raised in a toast. To our game, he said, his voice rich with anticipation, to secrets revealed, and to the thrill of the chase. May the best player win. The guests raised their glasses, but Poirot noted the unease that flickered across their faces, the detectives' battle race, and Oliver exchanged glances, their professional instincts alert. The others, Roberts, Lorimer, Despard, and Meredith, seemed to brace themselves, as if sensing the night held more than cards. Shaitana led them to the drawing room, where the card tables were set up under the soft glow of shaded lamps. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows across the room. The air was heavy with expectation, and Poirot felt a prickle of anticipation. This was no ordinary poker night. This was a stage, and Shaitana was its director. As the guests took their places, Poirot's eyes lingered on each of them. Roberts, with his booming laugh and too familiar manner. Lorimer, her calm exterior hiding a mind as sharp as a blade. Despard, whose silence spoke of experiences unspoken. And Meredith, whose nervousness seemed to mask something deeper. Shaitana had chosen his players well, but for what purpose? The cards were dealt, and the game began. But for Poirot, the true game was one of observation, of deduction, of peeling back the masks to reveal the truth beneath. And as the first hand was played, he knew one thing for certain. Before the night was over, the stakes would be far higher than anyone expected. Chapter 3. The poker game begins. The grand dining room of Mr. Shaitana's London mansion was a study in opulence, its walls adorned with dark, polished wood panelling that gleamed under the soft glow of a crystal chandelier. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax polish and the faint, lingering aroma of the lavish dinner that had just concluded. Hercule Poirot, seated at one end of the long mahogany table, adjusted his bow tie with a precise flick of his fingers, his sharp eyes scanning the assembled company. The evening, he sensed, was about to take a turn into uncharted territory. Shaitana, the host, lounged at the head of the table, his dark eyes glinting with a mischievous delight that bordered on unsettling. His silk cravat, a vivid shade of crimson, seemed almost too vibrant against the muted elegance of his tailored suit. He had spent much of the dinner dropping cryptic hints about his collection of guests, each comment laced with a theatrical flourish that made Poirot's mustache twitch with unease. Shaitana's earlier boast at the art exhibition that he collected uncaught murderers, as one might collect rare coins, had not been forgotten by the fastidious Belgian detective. Around the table sat an eclectic mix of individuals, each apiece. In Shaitana's carefully orchestrated game, to Poirot's left was Mrs. Ariadne Oliver, the famed mystery writer, her wild curls barely tamed by a jeweled hairpin, her eyes sparkling with curiosity as she scribbled notes on a napkin. Next to her sat Superintendent Battle of Scotland Yard, a broad-shouldered man with a face as unreadable as a blank ledger, his silence a stark contrast to Mrs. Oliver's animated chatter. Across from him was Colonel Race, a Secret Service man, whose lean frame and weathered features spoke of years spent in shadowy corners of the world. These were the detectives, the hunters, as Shaitana had gleefully called them during his toast. On the other side of the table were the four individuals Shaitana had labelled his specimens. Dr. Geoffrey Roberts, a jovial physician with a ruddy complexion and a booming laugh, seemed at ease, though his eyes darted occasionally to Shaitana with a flicker of wariness. Mrs. Lorimer, a poised widow in her late 50s, sat with the elegance of a bygone era, her grey eyes cool and assessing behind a pair of gold-rimmed spectacles. Major John Despard, a rugged adventurer with a scar tracing his jawline, maintained a stoic demeanour, his hands folded tightly as if restraining some inattention. And then there was Miss Anne Meredith, a young woman with delicate features and a nervous smile, her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief as Shaitana's pointed remarks seemed to land too close to her heart. Dinner had been a performance with Shaitana as the ringmaster. He had spoken of crime with a connoisseur's relish, comparing it to fine art, each act a masterpiece of daring or deceit. Murder, he had said, lifting his wine-glass, is not always a crude affair. Sometimes it is elegant. His gaze had lingered on each of the four specimens, and Poirot had noted the way Anne Meredith's face paled, how Mrs. Lorimer's lips tightened, how Despard's jaw clenched, and how Dr. Roberts' laughter rang a touch to loud dot now as the plates were cleared and the servants withdrew. Shaitana clapped his hands, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "My dear friends," he announced, his voice rich with anticipation, "the real entertainment begins. A game of poker, 2 tables, 2 rooms, and a chance to observe the human soul under pressure. What better way to spend an evening?" Poirot's eyes narrowed. Poker, he knew, was not merely a game of cards but a mirror of character. Every bet, every bluff, every hesitation could reveal the player's true nature. He glanced at Superintendent Battle, who gave a slight nod as if sharing the same thought. Mrs. Oliver, meanwhile, leaned forward, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "I do love a good game, M. Poirot, but I suspect Mr. Shaitana has more than cards up his sleeve." "Indeed, madam," Poirot murmured, his fingers brushing the edge of his mustache. "One must always watch the dealer closely." Shaitana led the group to an adjacent room, a spacious parlour with heavy velvet curtains and a roaring fire casting flickering shadows across the walls. The card tables had been set up, each covered in green baize and surrounded by 4 chairs. A silver tray held decks of cards, their edges gilded, and a small notebook for scoring. Shaitana gestured grandly. "We shall have 2 games. Our 4. Detectives Poirot, Battle, Race, and the inimitable Mrs. Oliver will play in this room. Our other guests, Dr. Roberts, Mrs. Lorimer, Major Despard, and Miss Meredith will play in the study across the hall. I, of course, shall merely observe, a humble spectator to your brilliance. The division was curious. Poirot thought Shaitana had deliberately separated the hunters from the hunted, ensuring that the four suspects would play together, unwatched by the detectives except through his own enigmatic presence. It was a setup designed to provoke, to unsettle, to reveal. As the guests moved to their respective rooms, Poirot caught Mrs. Lorimer's eye. She held his gaze for a moment, her expression unreadable, before turning to follow the others, and Meredith lingered, her steps hesitant, until Major Despard offered her his arm with a quiet, "Shall we, Miss Meredith?" Dr. Roberts clapped, Despard on the shoulder, his voice hearty. "Let's see if your luck in the jungle holds at the card table, eh?" The study where the suspects would play was smaller but no less luxurious, with a long window overlooking the darkened garden and a fireplace where Shaitana settled himself, in a high-backed chair. He lit a cigarette, the smoke curling lazily. As he watched the players take their seats, Poirot, lingering at the threshold between the two rooms, noted the arrangement. Shaitana's chair was positioned so he could see the card table clearly, yet his presence was unobtrusive, almost ghostly. The man, Poirot thought, was staging a drama, and the curtain had just risen in the parlour. The detectives settled at their table. Mrs. Oliver shuffled the deck with surprising dexterity, her eyes gleaming. "I once wrote a murder mystery set. At a bridge game," she said, "the victim was poisoned via a pricked ace of spades. Terribly clever, don't you think?" "Poison is too unpredictable for my taste," Colonel Race remarked, his voice dry. "A bullet is cleaner." Superintendent Battle grunted, dealing the first hand. "Cards don't lie, but people do. Let's see what this game tells us." Poirot, though focused on his own cards, kept his ears attuned to the faint sounds from the study. The clink of glasses, the soft murmur of voices, the occasional laugh from Dr. Roberts. He played conservatively, his bets small and precise, his mind elsewhere. Poker, he mused, was a game of observation as much as strategy. The way a player held their cards, the flicker of an eyelid, the tension in a hand, these were clues as telling as footprints in the mud. In the study, the game began in earnest. Dr. Roberts, dealing with a flourish, kept up a stream of jovial banter. "Now, Mrs. Lorimer, don't tell me you're one of those players who counts every card. I like a bit of flair myself, a bold bet to keep things lively." He tossed a handful of chips into the center, his grin wide. Mrs. Lorimer's lips curved faintly. "Flair is all well and good, Doctor, but precision wins the day." She matched his bet with a measured stack of chips, her movements deliberate, almost mechanical. Poirot, catching a glimpse through the open door, noted her calm, her hands steady as she arranged her cards. Major Despard, by contrast, played with a soldier's restraint, his bets conservative, his eyes scanning the table as if it were a battlefield. "I'm not here to throw money away," he said, folding early in the first round. His voice was clipped, but there was a tension in his posture that suggested he was more invested than he let on. And Meredith, seated across from him, seemed the least at ease. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up her cards, and she hesitated before every bet, her eyes darting to Shaitana as if seeking his approval or fearing his judgment. "I am not very good at this," she murmured, pushing a single chip forward. "Nonsense, my dear," Shaitana called from his chair, his voice smooth as velvet. "You have a natural talent for surprise. Play boldly and see where it leads." Poirot, still in the parlor, made a mental note of Shaitana's tone. The man was baiting her, testing her nerve. Was it mere amusement, or did he know something about in Meredith that made her the weakest link? The first hour passed with the rhythm of shuffled cards and clinking chips. In the parlor, Mrs. Oliver's bold bluffs kept the detectives on their toes, while battles steady. Methodical play wore down his opponent's stacks. Race, ever the strategist, seemed to enjoy the game less for the cards than for the chance to study his companions. Poirot, meanwhile, played with a quiet intensity, his mind cataloguing every detail, the way Battle's fingers tapped the table when he had a strong hand, the way Mrs. Oliver's laughter grew sharper when she bluffed. In the study, the dynamic was different. Dr. Robert's joviality began to grate, his loud bets and louder laughter filling the room. Mrs. Lorimer remained unflappable, her stack of chips growing steadily as she outmaneuvered her opponents with surgical precision. Despard's pile dwindled, his cautious play no match for her calculated aggression, and Meredith, meanwhile, seemed to shrink with each round, her bets erratic, her face pale. Poirot slipped into the study under the pretense of fetching a glass of water, his eyes taking in the scene. Shaitana, still by the fire, was watching Meredith with particular intensity, his cigarette forgotten in its holder. The jeweled dagger, a decorative piece from his collection, rested on a side table near the fireplace, its blade catching the light. Poirot's gaze lingered on it for a moment before returning to the players, enjoying the game. Poirot? Shaitana asked, his voice laced with amusement. Very much, monsieur, Poirot replied, his tone polite but guarded. It is most revealing. He returned to the parlour, his mind racing. The poker game was more than a pastime. It was a microcosm of human behaviour. Dr. Robert's boldness suggested a man unafraid of risk, perhaps even reckless. Mrs. Lorimer's precision hinted at a mind that thrived on control, possibly to a dangerous degree. Despard's caution spoke of discipline, but also of a man haunted by past mistakes. And in Meredith's hesitation, her fear was the most telling of all. Was she merely out of her depth, or was she hiding something more sinister? As the clock struck 11, the games continued, the stakes rising with each hand. In the study, Dr. Roberts made a bold all-in bet, his eyes gleaming with confidence. Mrs. Lorimer matched him without hesitation, her face a mask of calm. Despard folded, his expression grim, while Meredith bit her lip, her chips nearly. Gondot in the parlour, Poirot leaned back, his cards face down. As Amos, he said softly, "This game is not only about the cards we hold, but the secrets we conceal. I wonder, what secrets are being played out across the hall?" Mrs. Oliver's eyes widened. "You think one of them's going to crack? Oh, I'd love to write this into a novel. The tension, the drama." Battle's voice was low. "If Shaitana's right about his collection, one of them's more than just tense. They're dangerous." Race nodded, his eyes on the door, to the study, and Shaitana's poking them with a stick. He wants something to happen. Poirot's fingers brushed his mustache, his mind turning over the possibilities. Shaitana's game was a gamble, not just of money but of lives, and in such a game, Poirot knew, the stakes could turn deadly. The fire in the study crackled, casting long shadows across the room. Shaitana's cigarette burned low, the ash falling unnoticed to the floor. The jeweled dagger gleamed, a silent witness to the unfolding drama. And somewhere in the shuffle of cards and the clink of chips, a killer was playing their hand. Chapter 4. A deadly hand there in Mr. Shaitana's opulent drawing room hung heavy with anticipation, the kind that precedes a storm. The crystal chandelier above cast fractured light across the polished mahogany table, where the for suspects Dr. Geoffrey Roberts, Mrs. Lorimer, Major John Despard, and Miss and Meredith sat engrossed in their game of bridge. The cards snapped crisply as they were dealt, each player's movements betraying a flicker of their inner thoughts. In the adjoining room, Hercule Poirot, Superintendent Battle, Colonel Race, and Ariadne Oliver played their own game, though their attention drifted frequently to the other table. Shaitana himself, the enigmatic host, lounged by the fireplace, his dark eyes glinting with a mix of amusement and malice. As he observed his carefully curated guests, Poirot's sharp gaze darted between the players in the suspect's game, noting every gesture, every hesitation. Dr. Roberts, a robust man with a jovial demeanour that seemed almost polished, played with a bold flourish, his bids aggressive and his laughter loud. Mrs. Lorimer, a woman of refined elegance, her silver hair impeccably styled, handled her cards with a precision that spoke of a disciplined mind. Major Despard, rugged and suntanned from years abroad, played cautiously, his eyes narrowing as he calculated each move. And Meredith, the youngest, with her delicate features and nervous glances, seemed out of place, her hands trembling slightly. as she placed her cards. The evening had begun with Shaitana's provocative dinner conversation, his veiled hints about the art of murder and his supposed collection of killers who had escaped justice. His words had set a palpable tension among the guests, and now, as the bridge game unfolded, that tension seemed to coil tighter. Poirot, ever the observer of human nature, says that the game was more than a pastime, it was a stage, and each player was performing, consciously or not, for an audience of one Shaitana. Fascinating, is it not? Mon ami, Poirot murmured to Superintendent Battle, who sat beside him, his broad face impassive but his eyes alert. The cards, they reveal so much. The way one plays, it is a mirror to the soul. Battle grunted, his attention split between his own hand and the other room. I'd rather have a look at their alibis than their bidding habits, Poirot. Shaitana's playing a dangerous game, inviting these people here. Dangerous, oui, Poirot agreed, his mustache twitching slightly. But Shaitana, he thrives on danger. He is like the matador, waving the red cape before the bull. But which of our players, I wonder, is the bull? In the suspects' room, the game continued. Dr. Roberts, partnering with Mrs. Lorimer, was in high spirits, his hearty chuckle filling the room as he won a trick. Well played. Mrs. Lorimer, you've got the devil's own luck tonight. Mrs. Lorimer's lips curved into a thin smile, her eyes cool and assessing. Luck, Dr. Roberts? I prefer to rely on skill. Across the table, Major Despard frowned at his cards, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. Let's keep the game moving, he said, his voice clipped, and Meredith, his partner, glanced at him nervously, her hands fumbling as she sorted her cards. She had already misplayed twice, drawing a sharp look from Despard. Though he said nothing, Shaitana, seated in a high-backed chair by the fire, sipped his wine and watched with an almost predatory intensity. His long fingers toyed with the stem of his glass, and his smile was that of a man who knew a secret others did not. Poirot, catching his expression, felt a prickle of unease. Shaitana was enjoying this far too much, and Poirot's instincts told him that the night would not end without incident. The clock on the mantelpiece chimed softly, marking the hour as 11. The detective's game was winding down, their conversation turning to the suspect's behavior. Ariadne Oliver, her auburn hair slightly askew from her animated gestures, leaned forward. I've got a theory, she declared, her voice carrying a touch of theatricality. That young one, and Meredith, she's too nervous. It's not natural. I bet she's hiding something dreadful. Maybe she poisoned someone's tea. Poirot's eyes twinkled with amusement. Madame Oliver, your imagination, it is magnifique, but perhaps a touch too colourful. We must observe, not invent. Colonel Race, a man of few words, nodded. She's jumpy, I'll give you that. But they all are in their own way. Shaitana's got them rattled. Battle's gaze was fixed on the other room. I don't like it, he said quietly. Shaitana's pushing them too hard. Someone's going to snap. As if on cue, a sudden hush fell over the suspect's table. Poirot's head turned sharply, and Meredith had dropped a card, her face pale as she scrambled to pick it up. Dr. Roberts laughed, a little too loudly, while Mrs. Lorimer's expression remained unreadable. Despard's jaw tightened, and he glanced toward Shaitana, who met his gaze with a mocking smile. The game resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted. Poirot noted the subtle changes. Robert's laughter was a shade forced, Mrs. Lorimer's movements a fraction slower, Despard's posture stiffer, and Anne's hands now visibly shaking. Shaitana rose from his chair, stretching languidly like a cat, and strolled toward the suspect's table, his silk robe rustling softly. A splendid game, he purred, his voice rich with insinuation. Such skill, such strategy, it reminds me of other games, the kind where one must be very careful not to be caught. Mrs. Lorimer's eyes flicked up to meet his, her expression icy. Bridge is a game of precision, Mr. Shaitana. Not. Everyone appreciates its subtleties. Oh, I appreciate subtleties, Mrs. Lorimer, Shaitana replied, his smile widening, especially the kind that hide in plain sight. Poirot's fingers tightened around his cards. Shaitana was baiting them, and the air crackled with unspoken threats. He was about to suggest a break when a sharp gasp from Meredith drew all eyes. She had knocked over her glass, red wine spilling across the table like blood. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice high and brittle. I didn't mean no harm done, my dear," Shaitana said smoothly, though his eyes gleamed with something darker. "Accidents happen, don't they?" Despard stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I think we could all use a moment," he said, his tone curt. "I'll get a cloth." As Despard moved toward the sideboard, Poirot's gaze followed him, then shifted to Shaitana, who had returned to his seat by the fire. The host's eyes were half closed, his expression one of supreme satisfaction, as if the night was unfolding exactly as he had planned. Poirot's unease grew. Shaitana was orchestrating something, but what? The game resumed after the spill was cleaned, but the rhythm was off. The players moved restlessly, their concentration fraying. Dr. Roberts excused himself briefly to fetch a cigarette, his absence noted by Poirot. Mrs. Lorimer rose to adjust the curtains, her movements graceful but deliberate, and Meredith, still shaken, left the table to powder her nose, and Despard paced near the window, his eyes scanning the room. It was during this flurry of movement that it happened. Superintendent Battle, who had been watching the suspects' table closely, suddenly stiffened. "Poirot," he hissed, his voice low and urgent. "Look at Shaitana." Poirot's head snapped toward the fireplace. Shaitana sat motionless, his head tilted back, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. A thin trickle of blood ran from his chest, staining the silk of his robe. In the firelight, the jeweled hilt of a dagger gleamed, embedded in his heart. For a moment, the room seemed to freeze. Then Ariadne Oliver let out a stifled scream, and the detectives were on their feet. The suspects, alerted by the commotion, turned, their faces a mix of shock and confusion. Dr. Roberts, just returning, stopped dead in his tracks. Mrs. Lorimer's hand flew to her mouth, and Meredith gasped, and Despard's eyes narrowed to slits. "He's dead," Battle said grimly, striding to Shaitana's side. He checked for a pulse, his expression hardening. "Stabbed. Right under our noses." Poirot's mind raced, his eyes darting over the scene. The dagger, an ornate piece from Shaitana's collection, had been displayed on a table near the fireplace. It was a weapon of opportunity, not premeditation, or so it seemed. The suspects had all moved about the room during the game, each with a moment unaccounted for. Any one of them could have done it. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his voice barely audible. "The game, it has taken a deadly turn." Colonel Race, his military training kicking in, took charge of the room. "Nobody leaves," he barked. "Battle, secure the scene." "Poirot, what do you make of it?" Poirot was already moving, his small figure darting to the suspect's table. He picked up the score pad, his fingers tracing the neat columns of numbers. "The game," he said softly. "The answers, they are in the game." Battle, meanwhile, was examining the body. No struggle, he noted. He didn't see it coming. The killer was quick and quiet. Ariadne Oliver, recovering from her shock, joined Poirot at the table. "It's like one of my novels," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "A murder in a locked room, well, almost locked. But who and why? That, madam, is what we must discover," Poirot replied, his eyes narrowing. "The poker scores. They will tell us much. The way each played, the risks they took, the bluffs they made, it is all significant." The suspects were gathered now, their faces pale in the flickering light. Dr. Roberts cleared his throat, his usual bluster subdued. "This is ghastly," he said. "Who could have done such a thing?" Mrs. Lorimer's voice was steady, though her eyes were guarded. "We were all here, playing. It must have happened when we were distracted." And Meredith's hands twisted together, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't see anything. I was focused on the game." Despard's jaw was set, his eyes flicking toward the dagger. "Convenient," he muttered, earning a sharp glance from Mrs. Lorimer. Poirot raised a hand for silence. Amos, we have a puzzle before us. A man is dead, killed in a room full of people, yet no one saw the act. We must reconstruct the evening step by step, and we must begin with the game. Battle nodded, his practical mind already at work. I'll need statements from everyone. Where they were, what they saw, what they did. No one's above suspicion. Poirot's eyes gleamed. We, Superintendent. But I will take it one step further. I will examine not only their actions but their minds. The cards, they do not lie. They will tell us who played the fatal hand. As the detectives set to work, the suspects stood in a tense knot, their eyes darting between one another. The room, once warm with the glow of the fire, now felt cold and oppressive, the weight of suspicion settling over them all. Shaitana's game had ended, but a far more dangerous one had just begun. The investigation began in earnest, with Battle taking charge of the physical evidence. The dagger was carefully removed from Shaitana's body, its jeweled hilt glinting in the firelight. It was a ceremonial piece, sharp despite its ornate design, and its presence on the table near the fireplace meant it was accessible to all the suspects. Battle noted its position, close enough to be grabbed in a moment of impulse, far enough from the card table to require deliberate movement. Poirot, meanwhile, focused on the score pad. The bridge game had been meticulously recorded, each player's bids and tricks noted in misses. Lorimer's precise handwriting. Poirot studied the numbers, his mind working like a finely tuned machine. The scores, he murmured to himself. They are a map of the mind. The bold, the cautious, the reckless, the fearful, all are here. Ariadne Oliver hovered nearby, her curiosity overcoming her initial shock. What do you see? Mr. Poirot, is it a clue, a secret code in the scores? Poirot's lips twitched in a faint smile. Not a code, madam, but a revelation. Dr. Roberts, he bids high, takes risks, yet his scores are inconsistent. Mrs. Lorimer, her play is flawless, controlled, yet she takes no unnecessary chances. Major Despard, he is cautious, almost too cautious, as if he fears to reveal too much. And Mademoiselle Meredith, her scores are erratic, her bids hesitant. She is afraid, but of what? Oliver's eyes widened. You think the way they played shows who killed Shaitana? I think, madam, that the way they played shows who they are, Poirot corrected, and in knowing who they are, we may find who they are capable of becoming. Colonel Race joined them, his face grim. Battle's got the servants rounded up. They didn't see anything too busy in the kitchen. The guests were alone in here for most of the evening. Poirot nodded, his gaze returning to the score pad. Then we must rely on what we have. The game, the players, and the moment of death. Tell me, Colonel, did you notice anything unusual before the body was discovered? Race frowned, his memory sharp despite the chaos. Shaitana was quiet for the last half hour. I thought he was just watching, enjoying his little experiment. But now, maybe he was already dead. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A possibility, oui. The dagger, it was swift, silent. The killer struck when attention was elsewhere. But where was elsewhere? Battle returned, his notebook in hand. I've got preliminary statements. Roberts says he stepped out for a cigarette, maybe 5 minutes. Mrs. Lorimer adjusted the curtains, says the room felt stuffy. Despard was at the window, looking out. Meredith went to the powder room. No one admits to seeing anything near the fireplace. Poirot's fingers tapped the score pad rhythmically, and yet one of them did more than see. One of them acted. The dagger, it was not thrown, it was driven deep. This was personal, intimate. The killer stood close to Shaitana, close enough to feel his breath. Ariadne Oliver shivered. It's gruesome, Mr. Poirot. To think one of them just walked up and stabbed him with all of us here. Oui, madam, Poirot said softly. That is the brilliance of it, the audacity, to kill in a room full of people, knowing they are all distracted by their cards, their fears, their secrets. Battle's voice was gruff. We need to narrow it down. Motive, opportunity means. Shaitana was hinting all night about their pasts. Maybe one of them thought he knew too much. Poirot nodded, his mind already racing ahead. The motive, it lies in Shaitana's game. He invited these four because he believed them to be murderers who escaped justice. If he was right, one of them killed to protect their secret. If he was wrong, they killed to protect something else. The suspects were separated now, each seated in a different corner of the mansion's vast drawing room under the watchful eyes of Battle's men. Dr. Roberts maintained his jovial facade, though his eyes darted nervously. Mrs. Lorimer sat with her back straight, her expression unreadable. Despard paced like a caged animal, his frustration evident, and Meredith huddled in a chair, her face buried in her hands. Poirot approached Mrs. Lorimer first, his manner gentle but probing. "Madam, you are a woman of great control. Your play at bridge, it is impeccable. Tell me, what did you see when you adjusted the curtains?" Mrs. Lorimer's eyes met his, steady and unflinching. "I saw nothing out of the ordinary, Mr. Poirot. The room was warm, the air heavy. I opened the curtains to let in some air. That is all, and Shaitana. Did you notice him by the fire?" Her lips tightened. "He was sitting there as he had been all evening. I paid him no mind." Poirot nodded, filing away her words. He moved to Dr. Roberts, who was lighting another cigarette, his hand steady but his smile strained. "A terrible business. Poirot," he said, exhaling a cloud of smoke. "Can't imagine who'd do such a thing." "Indeed, Doctor," Poirot said smoothly. "You were away from the table, for a cigarette." "You said." Roberts nodded, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Just a quick puff. Needed a moment to clear my head. Bridge can be intense, you know. And during this moment, you saw nothing, no one near Shaitana." "Not a soul," Roberts said firmly. "I was by the door, away from the fireplace." Poirot's smile was polite, but his eyes were sharp. "Merci, Doctor. Your memory, it is most helpful." Despard was next, his impatience barely contained. "I don't know what you're fishing for, Poirot," he said bluntly. "I was at the window, looking out. Shaitana was alive when I last saw him. That's all I've got." "And your partner, Mademoiselle Meredith?" Poirot asked. "She was distressed." "None?" Despard's jaw tightened. "She's young, nervous. Shaitana's talk spooked her. But she didn't do this. She's not the type." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "And you, Major, are you the type to judge so quickly?" Despard's eyes flashed, but he said nothing more. Poirot moved to Meredith, who looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. "I didn't see anything," she whispered before he could ask. "I was in the powder room. I spilled the wine, and I was so embarrassed. I just wanted to clean up." Poirot's voice was gentle, almost fatherly. "Of course, mademoiselle. And when you returned, Shaitana, he was as you left him." She nodded, her hands twisting in her lap. "I think so. I wasn't looking at him. I was trying to focus on the game." Poirot thanked her and stepped back, his mind turning over the pieces of the puzzle. For suspects, for stories, each plausible yet laced with gaps. The dagger, the scores, the movements all were threads in a tapestry he had yet to unravel. Battle rejoined him, his face grim. "Forensics will take time, but the daggers clean no prints. The killer was careful, or they wore gloves, and the angle suggests it was someone standing close, not reaching from a distance." Poirot nodded, his eyes drifting back to the score pad. "The game, Superintendent, it is the key. We must reconstruct every moment, every bid, every trick. The killer played their hand, but they left a trace in the numbers in the cards. As the night wore on, the detectives worked tirelessly, piecing together the timeline. The suspects were questioned again, their stories cross-checked. The servants confirmed that no one else had entered the room, and the windows were locked from the inside. It was, as Ariadne Oliver had said, almost a locked-room mystery. But the Poirot knew there was no such thing as a perfect crime. The killer had acted in a moment of opportunity, but they had also acted in character. The boldness of Roberts, the control of Lorimer, the caution of Despard, the fear of Meredith, each was a clue, a piece of the puzzle that would lead to the truth dot by the early hours of the morning. The mansion was quiet, the fire reduced to embers. The suspects were allowed to rest under guard, while the detectives gathered in the drawing room. The score. Pads spread before them. Poirot's eyes gleamed with determination. "We have only begun, Zamis," he said softly. "But the game, it is not over. The cards, they will speak, and Hercule Poirot, he will listen." Chapter 5. Shadows of past crime messed there in Shaitana's opulent drawing room, hung heavy with suspicion, the kind that clung to the velvet drapes and seeped into the polished mahogany of the furniture. Hercule Poirot sat at a small, intricately carved side table, his neatly manicured hands folded in his lap, his eyes darting from one face to another. The poker game was over, the jeweled dagger still embedded in Shaitana's lifeless body, and for Detective Poirot himself, Superintendent Battle, Colonel Race, and Ariadne Oliver had retreated to this quieter corner of the mansion to strategize. The four suspects, Dr. Geoffrey Roberts, Mrs. Lorimer, Major John Despard, and Meredith, remained in the card room under the watchful eye of a Scotland Yard constable, their nervous glances betraying the weight of the evening's events. Superintendent Battle, a broad-shouldered man with a face as unreadable as a stone wall, leaned forward, his voice low but commanding. "We've got a murder on our hands, and it's one of those four. No one else was in the room. No one could have slipped in or out without being seen. The question is, who had the nerve to stab Shaitana in front of 3 others, and why?" Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching slightly as he considered the problem. "The why, mon ami, is always the key. Monsieur Shaitana, he was a man who played with fire. He invited these for his so-called collection of murderers, knowing they had secrets. He taunted them at dinner, did he not? He spoke of crimes, unpunished, of shadows in their pasts. One of them felt the noose tightening and acted. Colonel Race. His lean frame relaxed, but his eyes sharp, crossed his arms. Shaitana was a showman, always staging his little dramas. But this time, he miscalculated. Someone didn't just take offense, they took his life. Ariadne Oliver, her wild curls bobbing as she gestured animatedly, couldn't resist chiming in. "It's like something out of one of my books. A room full of killers, a host who knows too much, and a dagger straight to the heart. I'd have made it a poisoned cocktail. Mind you, more flair, but this is dreadfully exciting, except, well, for poor Shaitana." Poirot's lips curled into a faint smile. "Madame Oliver, your imagination. It is magnificent, but we must focus on the facts. Superintendent, what do we know of these four? Their pasts, their secrets, these are the threads we must unravel." Battle nodded, pulling a small notebook from his coat pocket. "I've had my men dig into their histories as much as we could. On short notice, Shaitana wasn't wrong about his collection. Each of these has a shadow hanging over them, something murky enough to make you wonder. Let's start with Dr. Geoffrey Roberts." He flipped open the notebook, his finger tracing a line of handwritten notes. "Roberts is a Harley Street physician, well respected, charming, bit of a gambler by reputation. But there's a case from a few years back that raised eyebrows. One of his patients, a wealthy industrialist named Craddock, died unexpectedly. Of anthrax? Rare for a man in his position, no obvious source of infection. The inquest ruled it natural, causes anthrax can come from contaminated goods. After all, but there were whispers. Craddock's wife, Mrs. Craddock, was also a patient. Of Roberts, she died a year later of a blood infection, supposedly from a bad inoculation. 2 deaths, both under Robert's care. Coincidence, maybe." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A doctor. He has the means to kill discreetly. Anthrax. Infections, these are not the weapons of a common murderer. They require knowledge, precision. And at the poker table, his play was bold, reckless even. A man who takes risks, perhaps. Battle agreed. Next, Mrs. Lorimer. Widow, early 60s, lives quietly in Kensington. Her husband, a stockbroker, died 15 years ago under odd circumstances. Official cause was heart failure, but there were rumors of poison, nothing proven. She's a cool customer, sharp as a tack, and her bridge game tonight was flawless. If she's a killer, she's the calculating type." Poirot tilted his head. his fingers tapping lightly on the table. Madame Lorimer, she plays with control, with discipline. Her bets were precise. Never a card out of place, a woman who plans, who thinks many moves ahead. If she killed, it would be with purpose, not passion. Battle turned a page. Then, we have Major John Despard, ex-military, explorer type. Spent years in the wilds of Africa and South America. There's a story from his time in the Amazon, a botanist he was guiding, fellow named Henderson, died in what was called a shooting accident. Henderson's gun supposedly went off while he was cleaning it, but locals claimed Despard and Henderson had argued over money. No charges, no proof, but the rumor stuck. Despard's poker play was cautious tonight, like he was holding back. Poirot murmured. The Major, he is a man of action, yet at the table he restrained himself. A man who knows danger, who has faced it before. But is he a murderer, or merely a man caught in unfortunate circumstances? Last is in Meredith. Battle continued, his tone darkening. Young, barely 25, works as a paid companion. She was employed by an elderly woman, Mrs. Eldridge, who died of poisoning 2 years ago. The inquest called it accidental. Mrs. Eldridge took the wrong medication, but Meredith was the one administering her pills. She's nervous, jumpy, and her poker game was a mess, hesitant, inconsistent, like she was afraid of making a wrong move. Ariadne Oliver leaned forward, her eyes wide. Oh, she's the one I'd cast as the killer. All that trembling innocence hits to perfect, like my character Sven Hierson when he's pretending to be meek, but really plotting something dastardly. Poirot chuckled softly. Madam, you see villains everywhere, but perhaps you are not entirely wrong. Mademoiselle Meredith's fear, it could be the fear of guilt or the fear of being discovered. We must learn more. Battle closed his notebook. That's what we've got so far. For suspects, for murky pasts, Shaitana knew something about each of them, and he made sure they knew it at dinner. He was practically daring one of them to act. Colonel Race rubbed his chin. The question is, which one? Stabbing Shaitana in the middle of a poker game, with 3 others in the room, takes guts, or desperation. Whoever did it had to move fast, quietly, and without drawing attention. Indeed, Poirot said, his voice soft but piercing, and that is why the poker game itself is our greatest clue. The scores, the bids, the way each player approached the game, these are the windows into their minds. I have the score sheets, and I shall study them closely. But first, we must speak to the suspects again. Their words, their reactions, they will betray them. The detectives agreed to split their efforts. Battle would coordinate with Scotland Yard to deepen the investigation into the suspects' backgrounds, pulling records, interviewing associates, and chasing any hint of evidence. Colonel Race would use his contacts to dig into Despard's time in the Amazon, as well as any international connections Shaitana might have had. Ariadne Oliver, despite her penchant for theatrics, volunteered to observe the suspect's behavior, claiming her writer's intuition would spot something the others missed. Poirot, meanwhile, would focus on the psychological angle, interviewing the suspects and analyzing the poker scores for patterns dot as the group dispersed. Poirot lingered in the drawing room, his gaze settling on the card-room door. The constable stood guard, but beyond the door the people sat in uneasy silence, each potentially hiding a deadly secret. He closed his eyes for a moment, his mind already sifting through the details of the evening, the flicker of fear in, and Meredith's eyes, the precision of Mrs. Lorimer's movements, the bold confidence of Dr. Roberts, the restrained strength of Major Despard. One of them had crossed a line tonight, and Poirot's little grey cells were already at work. Piecing together the puzzle dot, the next morning, the investigation began in earnest. Superintendent Battle's office at Scotland Yard was a stark contrast to Shaitana's lavish mansion, a cluttered room with filing cabinets, a battered desk, and the faint smell of stale coffee. Battle sat across from Poirot, a stack of files between them, each one bearing the name of a suspect. The constable's report from the night before confirmed that no one had left the card room during the poker game except to step briefly into the hallway for a drink or to use the lavatory. The dagger, a curved blade with a jeweled hilt, had been identified as part of Shaitana's collection, displayed openly on a side table. It was a weapon of opportunity, not premeditation, which only deepened the mystery. "Let's start with Dr. Roberts," Battle said, opening the first file. "I've got more details on the Craddock case. Charles Craddock was a tough old bird, made his fortune in steel, but he wasn't well liked, had a temper, fought with his wife constantly. When he died, the coroner noted anthrax is rare, but not impossible could have come from imported leather, or even a shaving brush, which Craddock used daily. Roberts was his doctor, prescribed him tonics, saw him regularly. No one could pin anything on him. But Craddock's son swore Roberts had been to cozy with Mrs. Craddock." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "And Mrs. Craddock's death? A blood infection, you said?" Battle nodded. "Sepsis, technically. She'd been getting inoculations for a trip abroad. Roberts administered them. The inquest found no evidence of foul play, but the timing was suspicious. 2 deaths in 2 years. Both patients of the same doctor. If Shaitana knew something, it might have been enough to spook Roberts." Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. "A doctor who kills with anthrax and infection, it is subtle, almost invisible. But to stab Shaitana, that is bold, impulsive. Does our Dr. Roberts have to faces, I wonder?" They moved on to Mrs. Lorimer. Her file was thinner, her life quieter. A widow of means. She lived alone in a Kensington flat, attended bridge clubs, and kept a low profile. Her husband's death had been sudden, attributed to a weak heart, but a neighbor had mentioned to police years ago that Mr. Lorimer had seemed healthy. Until the weeks before his death, there were whispers of poison, possibly digitalis, a heart. Medication, but no autopsy was performed as the family declined it. "Mrs. Lorimer strikes me as a woman who does not act rashly," Poirot said. "If she killed her husband, it was planned meticulously. To kill Shaitana in such a public way, it does not fit her, unless she was driven to desperation." Battle grunted. "Desperation's a powerful motive. Shaitana's dinner talk was like poking a hornet's nest. If he knew about her husband, she might have seen no other way out." Major Despard's file was more colorful, filled with reports of his expeditions. The Amazon incident stood out. Henderson, the botanist, had been studying rare plants when he died. Despard's account was that Henderson was cleaning his rifle when it discharged, but a local guide had claimed the 2 men argued over expedition funds. The Brazilian authorities ruled it an accident, but Henderson's family had pressed for an investigation, which went nowhere. "Despard's a man who's seen death," Battle said. "Jungles. Voorhees no stranger to violence, but a dagger in a drawing room, that's not his style. He's too disciplined to controlled. Yet at the poker table, he played with caution." Poirot noted, "A man who controls his impulses, perhaps because he knows what happens when he does not." Finally, they came to Anne Meredith. Her file was the thinnest, but the details were troubling. Mrs. Eldridge, her employer, had been a cantankerous widow who accused Meredith of stealing small items, jewelry, cash. When Mrs. Eldridge died, the coroner found traces of a sedative in her system, mixed with what was likely rat poison. Meredith claimed the old woman had been confused, mixing up her medications, and the inquest accepted her story. But Battle's instincts were prickling. "She's young, but don't let that fool you," he said. "She's got a temper." According to her flatmate, Rhoda Dawes, and she was jumpy as a cat last night. If Shaitana knew about Mrs. Eldridge, he might have pushed her too far. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Mademoiselle Meredith, she is the wild card. Her poker play was erratic, her nerves frayed. Fear can make one dangerous, superintendent. But is she a killer, or merely a frightened girl?" That afternoon, Poirot returned to Shaitana's mansion to interview the suspects. The card room had been sealed off, but the drawing room was open, its opulence now tinged with an air of unease. The 4 suspects sat in separate corners, each under the pretense of reading or sipping tea, but their eyes darted toward Poirot as he entered. He began with Dr. Roberts, who greeted him with a hearty smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Monsieur Poirot, I hope you're not here to accuse me of anything dreadful. I'm just a humble doctor, after all." Poirot's smile was polite but sharp. Humble, perhaps, but skilled. "Tell me, doctor, your patient, Monsieur Craddock, is death by anthrax." It was most unusual. Robert's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Terribly unfortunate. Anthrax can come from the most unexpected places. Imported goods. Shaving brushes. I did all I could for him, and Madame Craddock." Poirot pressed, his tone light but probing. "Another tragedy under your care. You must have been devastated." Robert's jaw tightened. "Medicine isn't an exact science, Poirot. Sometimes. Despite our best efforts, patients die. Shaitana's insinuations last night were in poor taste. But I assure you, I've nothing to hide." Poirot nodded, letting the silence stretch. Robert's confidence was polished, but there was a crack in it, a faint tremor in his voice when Shaitana's name was mentioned. Poirot made a mental note and moved on. Mrs. Lorimer was next, her posture ramrod straight, her grey eyes meeting Poirot's without flinching. "Monsieur Poirot, I assume you're here about my late husband." Shaitana's remarks were crude. "But I've heard worse. My husband's death was a tragedy, nothing more." Poirot tilted his head. "Madam, you are a woman of great composure. At the poker table, your precision was remarkable. Tell me, did Monsieur Shaitana's words disturb you?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening around her teacup. "Shaitana enjoyed his games. He thought he could unsettle me, but I'm not easily shaken. I had no reason to harm him." Her words were steady, but Poirot sensed a wall, carefully constructed, hiding something deeper. He thanked her and moved to Major Despard. Despard was pacing by the window, his rugged features tense. "Poirot, I'll be straight with you. Shaitana was a fool to play these games. That business in the Amazon Henderson's death was an accident, nothing more. I've no patience for men like Shaitana who dig up old wounds for sport." Poirot studied him. "You are a man of action, Major. Yet last night you played with restraint." "Why?" Despard shrugged. "No point throwing money away on cards. I'd rather keep my wits about me. Shaitana's dead, and I'm sorry for it, but I didn't touch him." Finally, Poirot approached Meredith, who sat curled in an armchair, her face pale. "Mademoiselle, you seem troubled. The events of last night, they have shaken you." "Oui." Anne's hands trembled as she set down her book. "It's awful, Mr. Poirot. Mr. Shaitana was so cruel at dinner, saying those things. I didn't do anything wrong, I swear. Mrs. Eldridge's death was an accident. She was confused, always mixing up her pills." Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. "And yet, mademoiselle, you were afraid last night. Your poker play, it was hesitant, uncertain. What did you fear?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I just wanted to leave. I didn't belong there with those people. I didn't hurt anyone." Poirot watched her closely, noting the way her hands twisted in her lap, the way her voice caught. "Fear, yes. But was it guilt or something else?" That evening, Poirot sat alone in his flat. The poker score sheets spread across his desk. Each suspect's handwriting, their bids, their wins and losses, told a story. Robert's bold, looping script matched his risky bluffs. Lorimer's neat, precise tallies reflected her control. Despard's sparse, practical notes showed restraint. Meredith's shaky, uneven marks betrayed her nerves. He leaned back, closing his eyes. Shaitana had orchestrated this game, knowing each player's secret. One of them had killed to protect that secret. But which one? The doctor with his medical expertise, the widow with her icy calm, the explorer with his violent past, or the young woman with her fragile facade? The shadows of their past crimes loomed large, and Poirot knew that somewhere in those shadows lay the truth. He would find it piece by piece until the killer's hand was revealed. Chapter 6. The psychology of poker there in Hercule Poirot's modest, yet meticulously organized sitting room was thick with the scent of strong coffee, and the faint tang of suspicion. The little Belgian detective sat at his polished mahogany desk, its surface cluttered with neatly arranged papers, a silver inkstand, and a small notebook containing the poker scores from the fateful night at Mr. Shaitana's mansion. The scores, scribbled in Shaitana's ostentatious hand, were not just numbers. They were a window into the souls of the players, or so Poirot believed. His grey cells, as he often called them, were humming with activity, piecing together the puzzle of a murder committed in plain sight. Across from him, sprawled in an armchair with the casual abandon of a woman unconcerned with decorum, was Ariadne, Oliver, the famed mystery novelist. Her notebook lay open on her lap, its pages filled with wild scrawls and doodles of apples a quirk that amused Poirot to no end. She chewed thoughtfully on the end of her pencil, her eyes bright with speculation. "It's the psychology, Poirot," she declared, waving the pencil like a conductor's baton. "The way they played their cards, it's a mirror of their minds. You can tell a murderer by how they bluff, can't you?" Poirot's moustache twitched with a faint smile. "Madame Oliver, you are, as always, a fountain of imagination. But you are not entirely wrong. The game of poker, it is not merely cards and chips. It is a dance of deception, of courage, of fear. Each player reveals themselves in their choices whether to bet boldly or to fold with caution. These scores," he tapped the notebook, "they are a map to the truth." The notebook lay open to the page where Shaitana had recorded the poker scores. From the suspects' table, Dr. Geoffrey Roberts, Mrs. Lorimer, Major John Despard, and Miss Meredith had played their hands under Shaitana's watchful eye, unaware that their host would soon be dead. A jeweled dagger plunged into his chest. Poirot's task was to decipher the patterns in their play, to find the telltale signs of a murderer among them. "Let us begin," Poirot said, his voice crisp and precise. "We shall examine each player's style, their scores, their decisions. For in the game of poker, as in life, one cannot hide one's true nature for long." Dr. Geoffrey Roberts, the bold bluffer. Poirot's finger traced the first column of numbers, labelled with Dr. Roberts' name. The doctor's scores were erratic, swinging wildly from high gains to sudden losses. He had bid aggressively, often raising the stakes when the cards on the table suggested caution. His bluffs, noted in Shaitana's spidery handwriting, were frequent and audacious, sometimes succeeding, sometimes failing spectacularly. "Dr. Roberts," Poirot murmured, "he plays as though he has nothing to lose. His bids are reckless, his bluffs bold to the point of foolishness. Yet he wins often enough to suggest a sharp mind beneath the bravado." Ariadne Oliver leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "He's the type, isn't he? The charming doctor, all smiles and confidence, but with a dark side. I bet he's poisoned half his patients. You know, in my last novel, The Clue in the Croquet Mallet, the killer was a doctor who—" "Madam," Poirot interrupted gently, "let us focus on the facts, not the fiction. Dr. Roberts' style suggests a man who thrives on risk. He does not fear exposure, or perhaps he courts it. Such a man might kill if he believed he could outwit those around him. The scores showed Roberts had won several hands by bluffing with weak cards, convincing his opponents to fold. But in one notable hand, he had overreached, betting heavily on a pair of threes only to lose to Mrs. Lorimer's straight. He is impatient," Poirot noted. "He seeks to dominate, to control the table. But his impatience betrays him. A murderer who acts on impulse might leave traces, Ariadne scribbled furiously, muttering about a doctor character for her next book. Poirot ignored her, his mind turning over the possibility that Robert's audacity extended beyond the poker table. Superintendent Battle had uncovered a troubling detail. One of Robert's patients had died of anthrax, a rare and suspicious cause. Could a man so bold in cards be equally bold in murder? Mrs. Lorimer, the calculated queen-exed. Poirot turned to Mrs. Lorimer's scores. Her column was a study in precision, her bets measured and consistent. She rarely bluffed, preferring to play strong hands with quiet confidence. Her wins were steady, her losses minimal. Shaitana's notes described her as methodical, almost mechanical, a player who seemed to anticipate her opponent's moves. Mrs. Lorimer, Poirot said, his eyes narrowing, she is the master of control. Her play is like a chess game, each move calculated, each risk weighed. She does not act on emotion, but on logic. Such a mind could plan a murder with meticulous care. Ariadne snorted. She's too perfect, that's what. Nobody's that. Come, unless they're hiding something. I'd write her as the villain's accomplice, the one who plans everything but lets someone else do the dirty work. What do you think? Poison in the tea, maybe? Poirot's lips twitched again. Your imagination. It gallops, madam. But Mrs. Lorimer's past is not without shadows. Her husband died under mysterious circumstances and superintendent battle. Suspects foul play. If she's a killer, she would not act rashly. The murder of Shaitana, however, was bold committed in a room full of people. Does this fit her? He studied the scores again. Mrs. Lorimer had won a significant hand against Roberts, her straight trumping his bluff. She had not gloated, Shaitana noted, but simply collected her chips with a faint smile. She is formidable, Poirot said. But is she a murderer, or merely a woman who plays her cards and her life with utmost care? Major John Despard. The cautious explorer Major Despard's scores told a different story. His bets were conservative, his bluffs rare. He played as though guarding a secret, folding often when the stakes grew high. Shaitana's notes described him as defensive, almost reluctant, a player who seemed more concerned with survival than victory. Major Despard, Poirot mused, he is a man of action, an explorer of jungles and rivers, yet at the poker table, he is cautious, almost timid. Why? Does he fear to reveal himself? Or is he simply prudent? Ariadne tapped her pencil against her chin. He's handsome, you know, or rugged and brooding. I cast him as the hero, not the killer. But maybe that's what he wants us to think. In Death on the Docks, I had a character like him turned out he was smuggling diamonds. What if Despard's hiding something from his adventures? Poirot raised an eyebrow. Your novels, madam, they are a treasure trove of possibilities. But let us consider the facts. A botanist under Despard's guidance died in the Amazon, shot in what was deemed an accident. Yet accidents, they can mask darker deeds. Despard's caution at the table suggests a man who knows the cost of recklessness. Would such a man stab Shaitana in a room full of witnesses? Despard's scores showed he had folded in several hands, where he held decent cards as though unwilling to risk a confrontation. Yet in one hand, he had called Robert's bluff, winning modestly but decisively. He is not without courage, Poirot said, but his courage is tempered by restraint, a killer. Perhaps, but not an impulsive one. And Meredith, the erratic. Novocephaly, Poirot turned to Meredith's scores. The young woman's play was a mess of contradictions, timid bets followed by sudden, reckless raises. Wins marred by inexplicable folds. Shaitana's notes were scathing. Miss Meredith plays like a frightened child, yet her eyes are sharp. She hides more than she reveals. And Meredith, Poirot said softly, she is the enigma. Her play is erratic, driven by fear or inexperience, yet there is cunning beneath it. She hesitates, but when she acts, it is with surprising boldness. Is this the mark of a killer, or merely a young woman out of her depth? Ariadne leaned back, her eyes wide. She's my favorite, so innocent-looking, but I bet she's got a secret. Maybe she poisoned that old lady she worked full-slipped. Something in her tea. You know, in the case of the crooked candlestick, I had a girl just like her, and she turned out to be, madam, Poirot said, his patience wearing thin. We are not writing a novel. We are solving a murder. Miss Meredith's past is troubling. The elderly woman under her care died of poisoning, though it was ruled accidental. Her fear at the table suggests guilt, but is it guilt for Shaitana's death or something else? Meredith's scores showed a pattern of hesitation, with several hands where she folded despite holding strong cards, yet in one hand she had raised aggressively, only to lose to Mrs. Lorimer's calm precision. She's unpredictable, Poirot said, and unpredictability can be dangerous or it can be a mask. The table's tension. Poirot closed the notebook, his mind racing. The poker scores were more than numbers, they were a psychological portrait of four suspects, each with a motive, each with a past. Dr. Robert's audacity, Mrs. Lorimer's control, Despard's caution, and Meredith's fear, they all pointed to different facets of human nature. But which pointed to murder? Ariadne Oliver was still talking, her theories growing wilder by the minute. What if they're all in on it? A secret pact? Or maybe Shaitana wasn't even the target, maybe he saw something he shouldn't have, like a love affair gone wrong. Oh, I've got it, Mrs. Lorimer and Despard are lovers, and they killed Shaitana to keep it quiet. Poirot sighed, rubbing his temples. Madame Oliver, your enthusiasm is admirable, but your theories, they lack evidence. We must focus on what we know. Shaitana was stabbed during the poker game in a room with 4 players, all of whom moved about at some point. The dagger was from his own collection, a weapon of opportunity. The killer acted quickly, decisively. But why? He stood, pacing the room with the measured steps of a man deep in thought. Shaitana! He was a provocateur. At dinner, he spoke of his collection of murderers, hinting at their secrets. This was no idle boast, it was a challenge. The killer felt threatened, exposed. But which of them could not bear the weight of Shaitana's knowledge? Ariadne's eyes sparkled. You're going to solve it, aren't you? With your little grey cells and all that? I wish I could put you in one of my books, but nobody would believe a detective like you. Poirot bowed slightly, his eyes twinkling. Madam, I am flattered. But the grey cells, they are not for fiction, they are for truth, and the truth, it lies in these scores in the minds of the players. We shall see who played the fatal hand. The investigation deepens the next morning. Poirot and Ariadne joined Superintendent Battle and Colonel Race at Scotland Yard. The room was stark, its walls lined with filing cabinets and maps, a stark contrast to Shaitana's opulent mansion. Battle, a solid, dependable man with a face like a bulldog, spread out photographs of the crime scene on a table. The jeweled dagger, its blade still stained with Shaitana's blood, gleamed under the harsh light. Poirot, Battle said, his voice gruff, you're onto something with those poker scores. I've seen a lot of cases, but this one's a devil. 4 suspects, all in the room, and not one of them saw a thing, or so they say. Colonel Race, lean and tanned from years in exotic locales, nodded. Shaitana was playing a dangerous game, inviting those 4. He knew something about each of them, and he wasn't shy about it. My money's on Roberts, he's got the nerve to pull it off. Poirot shook his head. Nerve, oui, but nerve alone does not make a murderer. We must consider motive, opportunity, and method. The poker scores. They tell us how each player thinks, how they act under pressure. Let us review what we know. He recounted his analysis, detailing Robert's boldness, Lorimer's precision, Despard's caution, and Meredith's erratic play. Battle listened intently, jotting notes. So you think the killer's personality is in their cards? He asked. Exactement. Poirot said, the killer is one who could act swiftly, without hesitation, yet with enough control to avoid detection. Robert's audacity fits, but so does Lorimer's calculation. Despard's restraint makes him less likely, but not impossible. And Meredith, her fear could be a mask for cunning. Ariadne, unable to resist, chimed in. What if it's a conspiracy? 2 of them working together. Roberts and Meredith, maybe she's young and impressionable, and he's got that charming smile. Or Lorimer and Despard, like I said before. Battle groaned. Mrs. Oliver, with all due respect, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. We've got one body, well, to now, with Mrs. Lorimer's death, and we need one. Killer. Poirot held up a hand. Patience, my friends. Mrs. Lorimer's death, it complicates matters. She confessed to killing Shaitana, yet I believe she lied to protect someone. Her murder suggests the killer is tying up loose ends. We must look closer at the poker game. At the moment of Shaitana's death, reconstructing the fatal hand back at Poirot's flat, the 4 detectives gathered around a small table, recreating the poker game based on Shaitana's scores and notes. Poirot had brought a pack of cards, and they dealt hands to mimic the suspect's play. Ariadne, delighted to be involved, insisted on playing Mrs. Lorimer's role, while Battle took Roberts. Race took Despard and Poirot reluctantly took Meredith daughters. They played. Poirot narrated the sequence of events. Shaitana was seated by the fire, watching the game. The players were at the table, but they moved about fetching drinks, adjusting the fire, visiting the cloakroom. The dagger was on a table near Shaitana, part of his collection. The killer saw their chance and struck. Battle, playing Roberts, bet heavily on a weak hand, mimicking the doctor's style. If I'm Roberts, I'm keeping an eye on Shaitana. Maybe I slip over to get a drink, grab the dagger, and stab him while the others are distracted. Race as Despard folded early. I'm not taking risks. If I'm the killer, I'm waiting for the perfect moment, not rushing in like Roberts. Ariadne as Lorimer played a strong hand, with calm precision. I'm watching everyone, calculating. If I'm the killer, I've planned this, down to the second. Nobody sees me move. Poirot as Meredith hesitated before folding. I am nervous, unsure. If I am the killer, I act on impulse, perhaps in a moment of panic. But would I have the nerve? They played through several hands, noting the moments when a player could have moved without drawing attention. The scores suggested a break in the game around the time of Shaitana's death, when Meredith had gone to the cloakroom and Roberts had refilled his drink. Lorimer and Despard had remained at the table, but their view of Shaitana was partially obscured by a screen. It's possible, Poirot said, that any of them could have done it, but the psychology, it narrows the field. Robert's boldness makes him a likely candidate, but Lorimer's control is equally suspicious. Meredith's fear could be guilt, and Despard's caution could hide a calculated act. A clue in the score-esses the day wore on, Poirot returned to the poker scores, his eyes scanning the numbers with renewed intensity. One detail caught his attention, a hand where Roberts had claimed a royal flush, a rare and dramatic win. Yet Shaitana's notes suggested Roberts' memory of the hand was vague, as though he hadn't been focused on the cards at all. This is curious, Poirot said, tapping the page. Roberts boasts of his royal flush, yet he cannot recall the details of the hand. He remembers the room, the position of the dagger, the flicker of the fire, but not the cards. Why? Because his mind was elsewhere, perhaps on the act of murder. Ariadne gasped. That's it. He was distracted because he was planning to kill Shaitana. Oh, this is going straight into my next book. Battle frowned. It's a stretch, Poirot. A man can forget a hand of cards without being a murderer. Perhaps, Poirot said, but it is a clue, a thread to pull. We must speak to Roberts again and the others. Their reactions, their lies, they will reveal the truth. Confronting the suspects the next day, Poirot and Battle visited Dr. Roberts at his Harley Street practice. The doctor was all charm, his smile disarming as he offered them tea. Gentlemen, I'm happy to help, but I'm afraid I've told you all I know. Shaitana's death was a shock, and poor Mrs. Lorimer terrible business. Poirot's eyes were sharp. Dr. Roberts, let us speak of the poker game. You won a hand with a royal flush, did you not? A remarkable achievement. Robert's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Did I? I suppose I did. It's all a bit of a blur, you know, the excitement of the evening and all that. A blur, you say? Poirot pressed. Yet you recall the room vividly, the dagger on the table, the firelight. Curious, is it not, that the cards escape you? Roberts laughed, but it was strained. You're reading too much into it, Mr. Poirot. I'm a busy man, patience to see, lives to save. Poker's just a game. Battle leaned forward and... Murder? Doctor, is that just a game too? Robert's face hardened, but he said nothing. Poirot noted the tension in his shoulders, the flicker of unease in his eyes. They left the practice with more questions than answers, but Poirot was certain. Roberts was hiding something. Next, they visited Mrs. Lorimer's elegant townhouse, only to learn of her death that very morning. The news hit like a thunderbolt. Her body found in her drawing room, a hypodermic mark on her arm. Another murder, Battle said grimly. The killers covering their tracks. Poirot's mind raced. Mrs. Lorimer's confession had been a lie. He was sure of it. But why? To protect someone or to provoke the real killer? The poker scores, the psychology, they were the key. And Poirot would not rest until he had played his final hand. The web tightens back at his flat. Poirot spread the poker scores across his desk, his mind a whirl of possibilities. Ariadne Oliver, ever enthusiastic, had brought a basket of apples, which she munched as she tossed out theories. What if Meredith's the mastermind? She's young, but that's the perfect cover. Or maybe Despard's not as innocent as he looks. Those explorer types always have secrets. Poirot smiled faintly. Madam, your imagination is a gift, but it must be tempered with logic. The scores, they tell us who acted out of character. Who was distracted at the moment of Shaitana's death? Robert's royal flush? It is the anomaly. His vagueness about the hand? It is not the mark of a man who plays to win, it is the mark of a man whose mind was on murder. Chapter 7. Tensions at the tabli there in Mr. Shaitana's opulent London mansion had grown thick with unease, the kind that settles like damp fog over a river bank, clinging to every surface and chilling the bones. The poker game, now a distant memory interrupted by the host's shocking murder, had left its mark on the guests, their nerves frayed like the edges of a well-worn deck of cards. Hercule Poirot sat in a high-backed chair in the drawing-room, his small, fastidious hands folded neatly in his lap, his moustache impeccably groomed despite the late hour, his eyes, sharp as a hawk's, darted from face to face, observing the subtle tells of discomfort that betrayed the four suspects: Dr. Geoffrey Roberts, Mrs. Lorimer, Major John Despard, and young and Meredith. Each sat stiffly, their postures a study in restraint, as if movement might betray a secret they wished to keep buried. Superintendent Battle, a man whose solid presence seemed to anchor the room, stood by the fireplace, his broad shoulders squared, against the weight of the investigation. His face, usually unreadable, betrayed a flicker of frustration as he reviewed the notes he'd scribbled during the initial interviews. Colonel Race, lean and weathered from years in the Secret Service, paced slowly near the tall windows, his gaze occasionally drifting to the dark gardens beyond, as if the answers lay in the shadows. Ariadne Oliver, the mystery novelist, sprawled in an armchair, her unruly hair escaping its pins, her fingers twitching as if itching to scribble a plot twist that would unravel the case. She muttered to herself, half-formed theories spilling out in a low, theatrical murmur. Poirot's attention, however, was fixed on the suspects. The murder of Shaitana, stabbed with his own jeweled dagger while they played bridge in the adjoining room, had cast a pall over the gathering. The detectives had agreed to pool their efforts, but it was Poirot who seemed to drive the inquiry, his mind a finely tuned instrument, picking up the faintest notes of discord. He had already begun to suspect that Shaitana's taunts at dinner, his sly references to uncaught murderers, had been the spark that ignited the fatal act. But which of the four had felt the heat of those words most keenly? Who had been provoked to silence their host forever? Dr. Roberts, a portly man with a ruddy complexion and a booming laugh that now seemed forced, leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming on the armrest. "This is all rather tiresome, don't you think?" he said, his voice carrying a practiced joviality. "I mean, a man's dead and here we are, playing at detectives when we should be mourning the poor fellow, mourning Dr. Roberts." Poirot's voice was soft, almost silken, but it carried a sting. "You did not seem so fond of Monsieur Shaitana during dinner. His, how do you say, insinuations did not sit well with you, non?" Robert's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing for a fraction of a second before he recovered. "Oh, come now, Poirot." The man was a showman, always spinning tales to shock his guests. "I didn't take him seriously. Did any of us?" He glanced at the others, seeking confirmation, but found only silence. Mrs. Lorimer, a woman of impeccable poise, sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her grey eyes cool and unreadable. Her silver hair was swept back in a severe bun, and her tailored dress spoke of understated wealth. She met Poirot's gaze without flinching. "Mr. Shaitana enjoyed his games," she said, her voice steady. "But I assure you, Monsieur Poirot, I am not so easily provoked. I played my cards, as did we all, and I saw nothing untoward." Poirot tilted his head, his expression one of polite skepticism. "And yet, madam, You played with such precision, such control. A woman of your intellect would notice, perhaps, if another player left the table. If, say, someone slipped away to deal with our host. Mrs. Lorimer's lips thinned, but she did not rise to the bait. I was focused on the game, Monsieur Poirot. Bridge requires concentration. I cannot speak for the movements of others. Major, Despard, a rugged man with sun-browned skin and a scar tracing the edge of his jaw, shifted in his seat, his discomfort evident. His hands, calloused from years of adventure in distant lands, gripped the arms of his chair. "Look here, Poirot," he said, his voice rough with impatience. "I don't know what Shaitana was playing at, but I didn't like his insinuations, any more than the rest. If you're accusing one of us, just say it plain." Poirot raised a hand, a gesture of calm. "Accusations, Major Despard, are premature, but questions are necessary. You, for example, moved from the table. During the game, did you not? To fetch a drink, perhaps?" Despard's jaw tightened. "I might have stepped away for a moment. It was a long game, and Shaitana's whiskey was tempting. But I didn't go near him. I swear it." And Meredith, the youngest of the group, sat on the edge of her chair, her delicate hands twisting a handkerchief into knots. Her auburn hair framed a pale face, and her eyes darted nervously between the detectives. She looked like a cornered animal, her breath shallow and quick. I didn't see anything," she stammered. "I was playing like everyone else." "I don't know why you're asking me these things." Ariadne Oliver leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of the mystery. "Oh, but you must have seen something." "Miss Meredith." A shadow, a glance, a flicker of guilt. "People always give themselves away, you know. I've written it 100 times in my books." Anne's face flushed and she shrank back. "I didn't. I swear I didn't. I was too busy trying to keep up with the game. I'm not very good at bridge, you see, and enough, Mrs. Oliver." Superintendent Battle cut in, his tone firm but not unkind. "Let's not badger the girl. We're here to get facts, not to spin stories." He shot Ariadne a pointed look, and she huffed, folding her arms. Poirot, however, was undeterred. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on Anne. "Mademoiselle, Meredith, you say you are not skilled at bridge, yet you played with, how shall I say, a certain hesitation. Was it the game that made you nervous, or was it, perhaps, something else? The presence of Monsieur Shaitana, maybe. His words at dinner." Anne's hands froze, the handkerchief a crumpled mess in her lap. "I don't know what you mean," she whispered, but her voice trembled. He said things, yes, but I didn't understand them. I just wanted to play the game and go home." Colonel Race stopped pacing and turned to face the group. "Shaitana was a provocateur," he said, his voice low and measured. "He enjoyed pushing people to their limits, seeing how they'd react. It's possible he pushed someone too far tonight, someone who felt their secrets were no longer safe." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over the group like dust. Poirot's gaze swept over the suspects, noting the subtle shifts in their expressions, Robert's forced nonchalance, Lorimer's icy composure, Despard's clenched fists, and Anne's barely concealed panic. Each was a piece in the puzzle, but the picture remained incomplete. Superintendent Battle cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "Right, let's go over the facts again. Shaitana was stabbed sometime during the second rubber of bridge. The 4 of you were in the room with him, playing at the table closest to the fireplace. The dagger was taken from the display case on the wall. Anyone could have grabbed it. No one else was in the house except the servants, who were all downstairs, and the 4 of us in the other room. So, one of you did it. The question is who and why." Dr. Roberts chuckled, though the sound was hollow. "You make it sound so simple, Battle. But we were all playing, weren't we? No one had time to sneak off and stab the man without the others noticing, were you?" Poirot's voice was sharp, cutting through Robert's bravado. "The game, it is not so demanding that one cannot step away for a moment. A trip to the sideboard for a drink, a pause to adjust a chair, a moment to admire the fire. These are small movements, easily overlooked. And yet, one of you found the time to plunge a dagger into Monsieur Shaitana's heart. Mrs. Lorimer's eyes flickered, a brief crack in her composure. You seem very certain, Monsieur Poirot, she said. Have you evidence, or is this merely your intuition? Poirot smiled a small, enigmatic curve of his lips. Evidence, madam, is like a fine wine, it must be savoured slowly. But rest assured I am collecting it, piece by piece. The scores of the bridge game, for instance, they tell me much about your characters, your precision. Madam is remarkable. Major Despard's caution, Dr. Robert's boldness, Mademoiselle Meredith's uncertainty. These are not merely styles of play. They are windows into the soul. And Meredith let out a small, choked sound, and all eyes turned to her. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the polished floor. I can't stand this, she cried, her voice breaking. You're all looking at me like I'm guilty. I didn't do anything. I didn't. She turned to Mrs. Lorimer, her eyes pleading. You were sitting next to me, you know. I didn't leave the table. Mrs. Lorimer's expression softened, but only slightly. My dear, you mustn't upset yourself. No one is accusing you, yet. Her words were meant to comfort, but they carried an edge that made them flinch. Major Despard stood, his tall frame towering over the seated group. This is getting us nowhere, he said, his voice tight with frustration. If you've got questions, ask them. But stop hounding the girl. She's barely holding it together. As it is, Poirot raised an eyebrow, his gaze shifting to Despard. Your concern for Mademoiselle Meredith is most gallant, Major. But I wonder, is it born of chivalry or something else? A desire to protect, perhaps, someone you believe? To be innocent or someone you know to be guilty? Despard's face darkened, and for a moment it seemed he might lunge at Poirot, but he restrained himself, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. You're a clever man, Poirot, but you're barking up the wrong tree. I didn't kill Shaitana, and neither did Miss Meredith. Then who did? Ariadne Oliver interjected, her voice bright with excitement. That's the question, isn't it? Someone in this room had a reason to shut Shaitana up. He knew something dangerous. Maybe he was blackmailing one of them. Oh, I can see it now, a dark secret, a desperate act, a dagger gleaming in the firelight. She clapped her hands, delighted by her own imagination. Superintendent Battle sighed. Mrs. Oliver, please, this isn't one of your novels. We need facts, not melodrama. Ariadne huffed but subsided, muttering something about uninspired. Policemen. Poirot, however, seemed amused, his eyes twinkling as he regarded her. Your enthusiasm, Madame Oliver, is most refreshing, and you are not entirely wrong. Monsieur Shaitana's death was indeed a desperate act, provoked by his words. But we must look beyond the theatrics to the truth, and the truth, Nzamis, lies in the details. He rose from his chair, his movements deliberate, and began to pace slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Let us consider the scene. The room where the bridge was played is small, intimate. The table was near the fireplace where Monsieur Shaitana sat, observing. The dagger was taken from the display case a mere step or two from the table. The act was quick, silent, precise. The killer returned to the game, their hands steady, their face a mask. But they could not hide everything. There are always traces, none a glance. A hesitation, a card played out of turn. Dr. Roberts snorted. You're spinning a fine tale, Poirot, but where's your proof? You can't pin a murder on someone because they played a bad hand. Poirot stopped pacing and turned to face him, his eyes gleaming. Can I not, Doctor? The cards, they speak. To me. Your boldness, for instance, it was not merely in your bids but in your movements. You left the table twice, did you not? Once to pour a drink and once to— What was it? Adjust the curtain, I believe you said. Robert's smile faded. What of it? It was a warm room. I needed air. And yet, Poirot continued, his voice soft but relentless. The curtain was not touched. The servants confirmed it was drawn tightly all evening. So why, Doctor, did you feel the need to leave the table, To distract your fellow players, perhaps? To create a moment of confusion, Robert's face reddened, but he held Poirot's gaze. You're grasping at straws, man. I didn't kill him. Poirot turned to Mrs. Lorimer. And you? Madam, you were so absorbed in the game, yet you noticed Mademoiselle Meredith's distress. You spoke to her, did you not? A quiet word, a touch on the arm. Was it kindness, or were you ensuring her silence? Mrs. Lorimer's eyes narrowed. You are impertinent, Monsieur Poirot. I spoke to Miss Meredith because she was upset. Nothing more. Poirot nodded, as if conceding the point, but his expression suggested otherwise. He turned to Anne, who had sunk back into her chair, her face pale. And you, mademoiselle, you were so nervous, so distracted. Why? Was it the game, or was it the man by the fire, watching you with those knowing eyes? Anne's lips trembled, and she looked to Mrs. Lorimer, then to Despard as if seeking rescue. I told you. I didn't do anything. I don't know why. He said those things at dinner. I didn't understand them. Despard stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. Leave her be, Poirot. She's had enough. Poirot's gaze lingered on the pair, his mind clearly working through the implications of their alliance. Very well, he said at last. But know this, Miss Amice, the truth. It cannot be hidden forever. The cards, the glances, the silences, they all speak to Hercule Poirot, and I will listen. The room fell silent once more, the tension palpable. Superintendent Battle exchanged a glance with Colonel Race, who nodded slightly as if acknowledging the challenge ahead. Ariadne Oliver, undeterred, scribbled a note on a scrap of paper, her face alight with ideas. The suspects, however, remained rigid, their secrets locked behind their carefully guarded expressions. As the night wore on, Poirot retreated to a corner of the room, his notebook open, his pencil moving swiftly across the page. He was reconstructing the bridge game in his mind, each bid and play a clue to the killer's identity. The scores, he knew, held a key not just to the game, but to the murder itself. Someone had played their hand too boldly, too desperately, and in doing so, had revealed themselves as the joker in Shaitana's deadly game. The hours stretched on, and the mansion seemed to close in around them, its opulent walls a gilded cage. The suspects, exhausted but unable to leave, watched each other warily, their trust eroded by suspicion, and Meredith, her nerves frayed to breaking, sought solace in quiet conversations with Mrs. Lorimer and Despard, their whispered exchanges, drawing Poirot's attention. Were they conspiring, or merely comforting one another? The answer, he knew, lay in the patterns of their behavior, the subtle shifts in their demeanor. Superintendent Battle, meanwhile, coordinated with the servants verifying their statements, and searching the house for additional clues. The dagger, wiped clean of fingerprints, offered little in the way of physical evidence, but its presence in the display case suggested premeditation, or opportunity seized in a moment of panic. Colonel Race, ever the strategist, reviewed the layout of the room, mapping the movements of the players in his mind. Ariadne Oliver, despite her penchant for dramatics, proved surprisingly useful, her writer's imagination catching details. The others overlooked a smudge on a glass, a chair slightly askew, a card bent at the corner. By the early hours of the morning, the group was weary, their defences worn thin. Poirot, however, remained alert, his mind a whirlwind of deduction. He approached Meredith once more, his tone gentle but probing. Mademoiselle, you are young, perhaps too young for such a night as this. Tell me, what did Monsieur Shaitana say to you at dinner that so unsettled you? Anne's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. It was nothing, just his way of talking. He said I looked like someone who carried secrets, but I don't. I swear I don't. Poirot studied her, his expression unreadable. And yet, mademoiselle, you are afraid. Of what? I wonder. Of the truth or of something else? Before Anne could respond, Mrs. Lorimer intervened, her voice sharp. Monsieur Poirot, you are distressing her. If you have accusations to make them to me. I am not so easily shaken. Poirot inclined his head, a gesture of respect. "Very well, madam. But know this, the truth, it is like a river. It will find its way, no matter how many barriers are placed before it." As dawn broke, casting pale light through the mansion's windows, the investigation paused, the group dispersing to their rooms under Battle's watchful eye. Poirot remained in the drawing-room, his notebook filled with cryptic notations. The case was far from solved, but he felt the pieces beginning to align. The killer, he knew, was among them, their guilt hidden behind a facade of innocence. But Hercule Poirot was not a man to be deceived by facades. He would uncover the truth, card by card, until the final hand was played. Chapter 8. A second death there in Mr. Shaitana's opulent London mansion had grown thick with suspicion, the kind that clung to the walls like the heavy velvet drapes that framed the tall windows. Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing-room, his small, precise hands clasped behind his back, his moustache twitching as he surveyed the scene. The poker game from the previous evening, with its fatal conclusion, had left an indelible mark on the atmosphere. Shaitana's lifeless body, discovered slumped by the fire with a jeweled dagger in his chest, had transformed the gathering from a curious social experiment into a grim investigation. Now, for detectives Poirot himself, Superintendent Battle, Colonel Race, and the effervescent Ariadne Oliver were tasked with unraveling the mystery, while for suspects Dr. Geoffrey Roberts, Mrs. Lorimer, Major John Despard, and Meredith remained under scrutiny, their every word and glance weighed for guilt. The morning light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the polished parquet floor. The room, still adorned with Shaitana's eclectic collection of artifacts, Persian rugs, gilded mirrors, and exotic statuettes, seemed to mock the gravity of the situation with its ostentatious charm. Poirot's sharp eyes darted from one suspect to another, noting the subtle shifts in their demeanor. Dr. Roberts, the jovial physician, maintained an air of forced cheer, his laughter a touch too loud as he recounted an anecdote to Colonel Race. Mrs. Lorimer, the poised widow, sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, her face an unreadable mask of calm. Major Despard, rugged and reserved, leaned against the mantelpiece, his gaze distant as if lost in the jungles of his past expeditions, and Meredith, the youngest, fidgeted with the hem of her dress, her delicate features betraying a nervousness that seemed to deepen with every passing hour. Superintendent Battle, a man whose solid presence anchored the room, cleared his throat. "We've got to proceed methodically," he said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "Shaitana's murder happened right under our noses, in a room with 4 people playing poker. One of them did it, and we need to know who and why." Ariadne Oliver, her wild curls barely contained by a scarlet headscarf, waved a hand dramatically. "It's like one of my novels. A locked room, well, not locked, but you know what I mean. For suspects, each with a secret. Oh, I could write a dozen books about this." She paused, catching Poirot's amused glance. "Well, perhaps not a dozen, but at least one very good one." Poirot inclined his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Madam, your imagination is, as always, formidable. But let us focus on the facts. The poker game, it was not merely a game, non. It was a stage, and our murderer, they played their part to perfection." Colonel Race, his military bearing evident even in casual conversation, nodded. Shaitana's game was a provocation. He invited these 4 because he believed each had a murder in their past. He was taunting them, and one of them snapped. Or planned it, Poirot added softly, his eyes narrowing. "The dagger. It was from Shaitana's own collection, placed conveniently on the table by the fire. The opportunity was there, but the motive, that is what we must uncover." The detectives had agreed to divide their efforts. Battle would continue digging into the suspects' backgrounds, leveraging his Scotland Yard resources to unearth any evidence of past crimes. Race would use his discreet contacts to verify alibis and connections. Mrs. Oliver, with a knack for intuition, would observe the suspects' interactions, while Poirot would focus on the psychology of the poker game itself, convinced that the scores and playing styles held the key to the killer's identity. As the morning progressed, the suspects were called in one by one for questioning. Dr. Roberts was first, his hearty demeanour undimmed by the circumstances. "Terrible business, this," he said, settling into a chair with a sigh. "Poor Shaitana. Never thought a man like him would meet such an end." Battle fixed him with a steady gaze. "You were in the room when it happened, Doctor. Did you notice anything unusual during the game?" Roberts shrugged, his smile easy. "Just a good game of poker, Superintendent. I was focused on my cards. Mrs. Lorimer's a sharp one. Mind you nearly cleaned me out with her bidding. Didn't see much else." Poirot tilted his head, his voice deceptively mild, "And yet, monsieur, you are a man of observation, non? A doctor must notice details. The position of a chair, the flicker of a shadow, the movement of a hand toward a dagger, perhaps." Robert's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "I'm afraid my eyes were on the cards, Mr. Poirot. Not much for shadows and flickers." Next came Mrs. Lorimer, her posture impeccable as she entered the room. Her grey eyes met Poirot's with a calm that bordered on defiance. "I understand you have questions," she said, her voice low and measured. "I will answer as best I can." Battle leaned forward. "Mrs. Lorimer, Shaitana hinted at dinner that you might have a colourful past. Care to elaborate?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Mr. Shaitana was a man who enjoyed theatrics. I am a widow, Superintendent. My husband died years ago. There is nothing more to say." And yet, Poirot interjected, "Your play at the poker table, it was most precise, calculated, even. Such control suggests a mind that plans carefully. A mind, perhaps, capable of a crime, Mrs. Lorimer's gaze did not waver. "I play to win, Mr. Poirot. That is not a crime." Major Despard followed, his answers clipped and to the point. He admitted to guiding a botanist who died in the Amazon, but insisted it was an accident, a misstep in treacherous terrain. "I'm not a murderer," he said, his jaw tight. "Shaitana was wrong about me." And Meredith was last, her hands trembling as she sat down. "I don't know why I'm here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't do anything." Battle's tone softened, but his eyes remained sharp. "Miss Meredith, you were in the room when Shaitana was stabbed. Did you see anyone approach him?" She shook her head, her eyes darting to the floor. "I was playing cards. I didn't notice anything." Poirot leaned forward, his voice gentle but probing. "Mademoiselle, you were nervous at the table. Non, your bids, they were erratic, hesitant. What was it that troubled you so?" Anne's cheeks flushed and she stammered, I don't like poker. It's not my game." The questioning continued, but the suspect's answers yielded little new information. The detectives reconvened in the drawing room, frustration mounting. "They're all hiding something," Battle said, rubbing his chin. "But we need evidence, not just suspicions." Ariadne Oliver paced the room, her scarf fluttering. "It's in Meredith, I'm sure of it. She's too nervous, too fragile. She's got guilt written all over her." Poirot raised a hand. "Patience, madam. Guilt, it is not always so obvious. We must look deeper, into the heart of their motives." As the day wore on, the tension among the suspects became palpable, and Meredith, in particular, seemed on the verge of collapse, her eyes red-rimmed as she whispered to Mrs. Lorimer in a corner. Major Despard watched them with a frown, while Dr. Roberts maintained his jovial facade, though his laughter now rang hollow. It was late in the afternoon when Mrs. Lorimer requested a private word with Poirot. They met in Shaitana's study, a room lined with books and curios, the air heavy with the scent of leather and polished wood. Mrs. Lorimer closed the door behind her, her face pale but resolute. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "I have something to confess." Poirot's eyebrows rose, but he remained silent, gesturing for her to continue. "I killed my husband," she said, the words falling like stones into still water. "It was many years ago. He was a cruel man, and I could not endure it any longer. I made it look like an accident to fall, they said. No one ever suspected." Poirot's eyes narrowed, but his tone remained gentle. "And why do you tell me this now, madam?" She drew a deep breath. Because I also killed Mr. Shaitana. He knew about my past, he hinted at it during dinner. I couldn't let him expose me. I took the dagger from the table when the others were distracted and did what I had to do. Poirot studied her, his mind racing. Her confession was too neat, too convenient. And you confess this freely, knowing the consequences. I am ill, Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice breaking slightly. I have little time left. A terminal illness, the doctors say. I have nothing to lose. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. Madam, your story, it is most compelling. But Hercule Poirot, he does not believe in confessions that fall so easily. You protect someone. None, or perhaps you seek to mislead. Mrs. Lorimer's eyes flickered, but she shook her head. I speak the truth. Do with it what you will. She left the study, and Poirot remained, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The confession troubled him not because it was implausible, but because it felt rehearsed, as if Mrs. Lorimer were playing a part. He resolved to keep a close eye on her, suspecting she might be shielding another. That evening, the detectives gathered for dinner, the suspects dining separately in the conservatory. The mood was somber, the clink of cutlery against plates the only sound for long stretches. Ariadne Oliver, never one for silence, broke it with a sudden exclamation. It's like a chess game, isn't it? All these moves and counter-moves. I bet Mrs. Lorimer's the queen. She's got that regal air about her. Battle chuckled despite himself. And who's the king? Mrs. Oliver. Why, Poirot, of course, she declared, gesturing at him with a fork. He's the one orchestrating it all. Poirot smiled faintly. Madam, you flatter me. But the king, he is not always the most powerful piece. Sometimes it is the pawn who changes the game. The conversation was cut short by a scream from the conservatory. The detectives rushed in to find Meredith standing over Mrs. Lorimer, who lay slumped in her chair, her face ashen. Dr. Roberts was already at her side, checking her pulse, but his expression was grim. She's dead, he said, his voice hollow. No pulse. Battle knelt beside her, his trained eyes scanning for clues. No visible wounds. He muttered, Poison, perhaps? Poirot's gaze fell on a small glass of wine beside Mrs. Lorimer's plate, untouched save for a single sip. The wine superintendent. Have it tested at once. The room erupted into chaos, with Meredith sobbing and Major Despard demanding answers. Dr. Roberts, oddly calm, assisted Battle in securing the scene, while Colonel Race escorted the remaining suspects to the drawing room. Poirot stood over Mrs. Lorimer's body, his mind racing. The confession, the sudden death, it was too convenient, too staged. He noticed a faint mark on her arm, barely visible beneath the sleeve of her dress, a hypodermic. He murmured to himself, administered with precision. Battle joined him, his face grim. If this is murder, it's bold. To killings in 2 days, right under our noses. Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. But this time, the killer, they have made a mistake. The confession of Madame Lorimer. It was a diversion. She did not kill Shaitana. She knew the true killer and sought to protect them, or to force their hand. Ariadne Oliver, hovering nearby, gasped, You mean she sacrificed herself? Oh, that's positively Shakespearean. Poirot shook his head. Not a sacrifice, madam. A gambit. And now, we must find the player who made this move. The detectives worked late into the night, analyzing the scene. The wine glass was sent for analysis, and Battle's men confirmed the presence of a lethal injection mark on Mrs. Lorimer's arm. The poison, they suspected, was fast-acting, likely administered during the brief moment she was alone at the table. And Meredith, still shaken, was questioned again. I didn't see anything, she insisted, her voice trembling. I was talking to Major Despard, and then she just collapsed. Despard corroborated her story, but his eyes were troubled. She was fine 1 minute, gone the next. It doesn't make sense. Dr. Roberts, ever the helpful physician, offered to assist with the autopsy, but Battle declined, citing protocol. Poirot watched Roberts closely. Noting the faint sheen of sweat on his brow despite his calm demeanor as the night drew to a close, Poirot retired to his room, his mind a whirlwind of clues and contradictions. Mrs. Lorimer's confession had been a lie, he was certain, but why? To protect Meredith, perhaps, who seemed so fragile, or to lure the true killer into a false sense of security, the poker scores, the playing styles. The subtle glances exchanged during the game all pointed to a deeper truth, one Poirot was determined to uncover. He sat at the small desk in his room, the poker score sheets spread before him. Robert's bold bids, Lorimer's precision, Despard's caution, Meredith's hesitation. They were more than just gameplay. They were windows into the souls of the players, and somewhere in those numbers lay the key to the killer's identity. The mansion was silent, save for the distant ticking of a grandfather clock. Poirot leaned back, his eyes half closed, his little grey cells working tirelessly. The killer, he murmured, they are clever, but not clever enough. Hercule Poirot, he will find you. The next morning, the detectives gathered. In the drawing-room, the weight of the second death pressing heavily on them. Battle had received preliminary results from the wine glass, no poison. The lethal agent had indeed come from the injection, a fast-acting toxin likely administered with a hypodermic needle. It's medical, Battle said, his voice tight. Someone with access to drugs and the skill to use them. Poirot's eyes flickered toward Dr. Roberts, who was conversing with Colonel Race in a corner. A doctor, perhaps, he said, softly. But we must not jump to conclusions, Non. The evidence, it must guide us. Ariadne Oliver, sipping a cup of tea, leaned forward. What about Meredith? She was right there when Mrs. Lorimer collapsed. And she's been a nervous wreck since we got here. True, Race said, but nervous doesn't mean guilty. She's young, out of her depth. Despard, on the other hand, he's got the look of a man who's seen death before. Poirot shook his head. We must not be swayed by appearances. The poker game, it tells us more than their faces. I will study the scores again. There is something there, something I have missed. The day passed in a blur of interviews and investigations. Battle's men scoured the mansion for the murder weapon, a hypodermic needle, perhaps discarded in haste. Meanwhile, Poirot pored over the poker scores, his mind tracing patterns in the numbers. Robert's bids were erratic, bold one moment, cautious the next, as if his attention had been divided. Lorimer's was steady, precise, until the final hand where her score faltered. Despard played conservatively, never taking risks. Meredith's scores were a mess. Her bids inconsistent. Her hands trembling on the page. It is the inconsistency, Poirot muttered, that reveals the truth. By late afternoon, the detectives reconvened. Battle had a breakthrough, a small vial, hidden in a potted plant in the conservatory, containing traces of a rare toxin. It's not something you'd find in a household, he said. This is medical grade, used in hospitals. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And who among us has access to such things? A doctor, perhaps, or eyes turned to Dr. Roberts, who had just entered the room. He froze, his smile fading. Now, see here, he began, but Battle cut him off. Dr. Roberts, we'll need to search your belongings, and I'd like a word about your whereabouts during dinner. Roberts protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Poirot watched him closely, noting the slight tremble in his hands, the way his eyes darted toward the door. The game is not yet over, monsieur, Poirot said softly. But the cards, they are turning against you. As the investigation deepened, the truth began to take shape like a puzzle coming together piece by piece. Mrs. Lorimer's death was no accident, nor was her confession genuine. She had played her part in the killer's game, but for what purpose? To protect another, or to expose them? Poirot knew the answer lay in the delicate balance of motive and opportunity, and he would not rest until he had unmasked the player who had dealt this deadly hand. Chapter 9. The river incident. Late afternoon sun cast a golden sheen across the Thames, its surface rippling gently as Meredith and her flatmate rode outdoors, prepared for their impromptu punting excursion. The air was warm, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers from the river bank. and the distant hum of London traffic faded into a soothing backdrop of lapping water and birdsong. To an outsider, the scene might have appeared idyllic, a young woman and her friend enjoying a leisurely outing on the river. But beneath the serene surface, tension simmered, coiled tightly like a spring waiting to snap. And Meredith, her delicate features framed by a wide-brimmed hat, gripped the punt pole with a steadiness that belied the turmoil in her mind. Her blonde hair, usually pinned neatly, hung loose in soft waves, and her blue eyes darted nervously toward Rhoda, who sat at the bow, chattering animatedly about the weather, the river, and the quaint charm of the punting tradition. Rhoda, with her dark curls and infectious enthusiasm, seemed oblivious to Anne's unease, her laughter ringing out as she trailed her fingers in the cool water. "Do be careful, Rhoda," Anne said, her voice light but edged with a faint tremor. "The river's deeper than it looks, oh, and don't be such a worrier." Rhoda replied, grinning. "It's barely a trickle here. Besides, you're the expert with that pole. I trust you completely." Anne's smile was tight, her knuckles whitening around the pole as she pushed the punt forward, the wooden vessel gliding smoothly through the water. The invitation to go punting had been her idea, a sudden one proposed that morning over breakfast. Rhoda, always eager for adventure, had agreed without hesitation, delighted by the prospect of a carefree afternoon. But Anne's motives were far from carefree. Her thoughts churned with the weight of recent events: Shaitana's murder, Mrs. Lorimer's shocking death, and the relentless scrutiny of Hercule Poirot and Superintendent Battle. The walls were closing in, and Anne felt the noose of suspicion tightening around her. The poker night at Shaitana's mansion replayed in her mind like a haunting refrain. She could still see Shaitana's sly smile as he dropped cryptic hints about his guests' pasts, his dark eyes glinting with malicious amusement, and had felt exposed, as if he'd peeled back the layers of her carefully constructed facade, to reveal the truth she'd buried years ago. The elderly woman she'd cared for, Mrs. Benson, had died under suspicious circumstances, poisoned, the whispers said, though no one had ever proven it, and had been young, desperate, and cornered by Mrs. Benson's accusations of theft. The memory of that desperate act gnawed at her, a secret she'd thought was safe until Shaitana's words had stirred. Her fear a new dot, and now Mrs. Lorimer was dead, her confession to Poirot casting a shadow over the remaining suspects, and had been stunned when she heard of it. Lorimer, so poised and calculating, admitting to murdering her husband and Shaitana, it seemed impossible. Yet the woman's death by lethal injection had sealed her fate as a killer in the eyes of the detectives, but Anne wasn't convinced. Something about Lorimer's confession felt off, like a card played out of turn. Had she been protecting someone, and if so, who? Anne's gaze flickered to Rhoda, who was now humming a tune, her back turned as she admired the riverbank's greenery. Rhoda, with her open heart and trusting nature, had become a liability, and had confided in her one sleepless night, her nerves frayed by Poirot's probing questions. She hadn't meant to say so much, but the words had spilled out hints of her past, her fears, her desperation. Rhoda had listened with wide-eyed sympathy, promising to keep her secrets, but Anne knew better than to trust promises. Secrets had a way of slipping out, especially when Superintendent Battle was circling like a bloodhound. The punt glided into a quieter stretch of the river where the banks were lined with willows, their branches drooping low over the water. The solitude was perfect, the kind of isolation Anne had counted on when she'd suggested this outing. She glanced around, ensuring no other boats were nearby. The nearest punt was a distant speck, its occupants too far to notice anything amiss. Her heart pounded, a mix of dread and resolve. She had to act, to silence the one person who knew too much. It was the only way to protect herself. Rhoda, and said, her voice soft, almost tender, "Why don't we stop here for a bit? The view's lovely, and I could use a rest." Rhoda turned, her smile bright. "Good idea. My arms are getting tired just sitting here doing nothing. Shall we pull over?" And nodded, steering the punt toward a shallow bank, where the water was still and the willows provided a curtain of privacy. She drove the pole into the riverbed, anchoring the punt, and stepped carefully toward the bow, her movements deliberate. Rhoda, oblivious, began rummaging in her bag for a bottle of lemonade, her back to Anne. "It's so peaceful here," Rhoda said, unscrewing the cap. "I'm glad you suggested this, Anne. It's just what we needed after all that awful business at Shaitana's," and didn't respond. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached into her own bag, her fingers closing around a small, heavy object, a brass paperweight she'd slipped in that morning, its weight reassuring in her palm. She told herself it was just a precaution, a last resort, but now, as she stood behind Rhoda, the decision felt inevitable. One swift movement, a push into the deep water, and the current would do the rest. An accident, they'd call it. Poor Rhoda, caught in a tragic mishap. No one would suspect otherwise. She raised the paperweight, her breath shallow, her mind racing with justifications. Rhoda was her friend, yes, but she was also a risk, a loose thread that could unravel everything, and had survived too much to let it all collapse now. She took a step closer, the punt rocking slightly under her weight. "And look," Rhoda exclaimed suddenly, pointing toward the bank. "Is that a heron? I've never seen one so close," and froze, the paperweight slipping back into her bag as she followed Rhoda's gaze. A grey heron stood motionless among the reeds, its sleek form blending with the shadows. The moment shattered her resolve, and she felt a pang of guilt. Could she really do this? Rhoda was innocent, unaware of the danger she was in, but the fear of exposure gnawed at and urging her to act. Before she could decide, a shout echoed across the water. "Miss Meredith! Miss Dawes!" Anne's heart lurched. She spun around to see a small motorboat approaching, its engine humming. Softly, Superintendent Battle stood at the helm, his broad shoulders unmistakable even at a distance. Beside him was Hercule Poirot, his neat figure clad in a light summer suit, his mustache twitching as he waved a hand in greeting. The sight of them sent a jolt of panic through Anne. How had they found her? Had someone seen through her plan? "Stay calm," she whispered to herself, forcing a smile as the motorboat drew closer. Rhoda, oblivious to the tension, waved back. Enthusiastically, "Fancy seeing you here." Rhoda called out, "Are you two out for a river adventure too?" Poirot's eyes, sharp and unyielding, fixed on Anne as the motorboat pulled alongside the punt. "Mademoiselle Meredith, Mademoiselle Dawes," he said, his voice polite but laced with an undercurrent of steel. "We were concerned for your safety. The river, it can be treacherous, Ann's grip tightened on the punt pole, her mind racing for an excuse. "We're fine, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. "Just enjoying a quiet afternoon." Battle's gaze was less subtle, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the punt. "Quiet's good," he said, gruffly, "but we had a tip you might be out here. Thought we'd checking, given recent events." "A tip?" Anne's smile faltered. "From whom?" Poirot tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "A friend of Mademoiselle Dawes, perhaps. Someone who noticed your sudden interest in punting. It is curious, is it not, to choose such an activity so soon after such tragedy?" Anne's throat tightened. Rhoda, still cheerful, looked between them, her brow furrowing. "A tip? What's this about, Anne? Is something wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Anne said quickly. Her voice too sharp, she softened it, forcing a laugh. "Just a misunderstanding, I'm sure. We're perfectly safe." But the moment of distraction was all it took. Rhoda, leaning forward to peer at the motorboat, lost her balance. The punt tipped dangerously, and before Anne could react, Rhoda tumbled into the water with a cry. The current, stronger here than it appeared, pulled her under almost instantly. "Rhoda!" Anne screamed, her panic genuine now. She dropped the pole and lunged toward the edge of the punt, her hands grasping at empty air. For a fleeting moment, she saw her chance. Let the river take Rhoda, let it look like an accident. But Poirot's piercing gaze held her, and she knew she couldn't risk it. Not with them watching. Battle was already in motion, stripping off his jacket and diving into the water with surprising agility for a man of his size. Poirot, less athletic but quick to act, maneuvered the motorboat closer. shouting instructions to Anne. "Stay where you are, mademoiselle. Do not move the punt." Anne's hands shook as she gripped the sides of the punt, her mind a whirlwind of fear and calculation. Had they seen the paperweight? Had they guessed her intent? She watched as Battle surfaced, his strong arms pulling Rhoda's limp form toward the motorboat. Poirot leaned over, helping to haul her aboard, his movements precise despite the urgency. Rhoda coughed and sputtered, her face pale but alive. Battle climbed back into the motorboat, his clothes dripping, and fixed Anne with a hard stare. "That was close," he said, his tone heavy with unspoken accusation. "Too close." Anne's heart pounded, her thoughts scrambling for a way out. "It was an accident," she said, her voice trembling. She leaned too far. "I tried to warn her, indeed," Poirot cut in, his voice smooth but cutting. "And yet, mademoiselle, you did not move to help her until we arrived." A curious hesitation, non. Anne's mouth went dry. She opened it to protest, but the words wouldn't come. Rhoda, shivering and wrapped in Battle's jacket, looked at her with confusion and something else doubt. The weight of that look was unbearable. I was shocked and stammered. "I didn't know what to do." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mustache twitching as if he could sense the lie. "The river. It is a place of truth," he said softly. "It reveals what is hidden. And you, Mademoiselle Meredith, have much that is hidden, I think." The motorboat rocked gently as Battle started the engine, guiding it toward the bank. Rhoda, still dazed, clung to the side, her eyes flickering, between Anne and the detectives, and felt the world closing in, her carefully laid plans unraveling with every second. She had to act to salvage something from this disaster. Without thinking, she grabbed the punt pole and pushed off from the bank, her movements frantic. The punt lurched forward, away from the motorboat. "Anne, what are you doing?" Rhoda called, her voice weak but alarmed. "Stay back," and shouted, her voice breaking. "I need to get away, just let me go." But the river was unforgiving. The pole caught in the muddy riverbed, and the punt tilted violently, and lost her balance, her arms flailing as she tried to steady herself. The paperweight slipped from her bag, clattering onto the punt's floor, its brass surface glinting accusingly in the sunlight. She reached for it, desperate to hide the evidence, but the punt rocked again, and she fell. The water was shockingly cold, closing over her head as she sank. She kicked frantically, her lungs burning, her hands clawing at the murky depths. For a moment, she thought she saw Rhoda's face above her, distorted by the water's surface. But it was Battle's strong grip that pulled her up, his arm locking around her as he dragged her toward the motorboat. She gasped for air, coughing violently as she was hauled aboard. Poirot stood over her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes sharp as ever. "Mademoiselle Meredith," he said, his voice low. "The river has spoken, and it has much to say about you." And strength gave out, her body slumping against the motorboat's side. The paperweight, retrieved by Battle from the punt, lay in his hand like a damning verdict. She knew in that moment that her secrets were no longer hers alone. The game was over and she had lost. Battle secured the punt to the motorboat, ensuring it wouldn't drift away, and began the slow journey back to the dock. Rhoda, shivering but safe, stared at Anne with a mix of pity and betrayal. Poirot, ever the observer, watched in silence, his mind already piecing together the final threads of the puzzle. As the motorboat chugged toward the shore, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the river. The idyllic scene was gone, replaced by the stark reality of suspicion and truth. And Meredith, her plans undone by her own desperation, knew she would face the consequences of her actions. And Hercule Poirot, with his relentless pursuit of justice, would ensure that no secret remained hidden for long. The river incident, as it would later be called, marked a turning point in the case. Anne's actions, driven by fear and guilt, had exposed her as a woman capable of desperate measures. But was she Shaitana's killer? Or had her panic stemmed from another crime, one buried in her past? Poirot, his little grey cells working tirelessly, knew the answers lay not just in the events of that afternoon, but in the intricate patterns of the poker game that had started it all. For now, though, the immediate danger was over. Rhoda was safe and was in custody, and the river flowed on, its secrets carried away in its ceaseless current. But the case was far from closed, and Poirot's work was only beginning.